in the context of economic warfare,
Yeah.
but also able to mask the movement so they stay ahead of the curve. Because one of the big issues with economic warfare is like making sure whoever you're attacking doesn't know your next moves, because then they can like get out of them. But that's where the information warfare, because you get that in the De Medici period,
Yeah.
with like lots of familial fucking.
I think the reason that we were aware of that is because it was so. It was. For as much as it was economic intrigue and manipulation and political chess, I think that on some level it was also a really sordid and very tightly knit story where all the players are so close to each other that everyone can't help but know each other. And it's like, it's not the first time that has happened, but
No, not at all.
but every other time before it was much more spread out,
Yep.
and so it wouldn't have been as easy to get a picture of it at all. Whereas,
I think that illuminates it for the average person who learns about that structure, and that, I mean, then you go to any dynasty,
yeah,
and then you start to see when people start setting up their eventual backstabs and how they're going to take over the empire, and why that eventually led to the fall of the empire. And once one person started the backstabbing, it was a line of backstabbing, and all the next four rulers got killed, and then eventually, there's all these different ways it plays out.
no, it's like in the historical. The fictional representation, they always introduce like some really like nondescript female character who's just like the cleaning lady or something. But then, of course, 2 volumes later, she's like the mother of the emperor.
Mm-hmm.
And, and there was a reason that like she was always like in the background of every scene.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's a God, I can't even remember the guy's name now. I wrote this book. It was like a tale of a different city, and it's about
Just one, not two.
Huh?
A tale of one city, not two cities.
No, it's a tale of a different city.
A different city.
Yeah, it's
I'm saying the tale
oh,
of
yeah.
two cities.
But it's a story of Marco Polo and Kublai Khan, and how Kublai can't leave his palace because everyone wants to kill him. And he's like, and Marco's like telling him about all the places that he's visited, and by the end you realize that he's talking about the palace.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting because my understanding of Kublai Khan's court is that it was extremely like diverse, exceptionally diverse. He had people of every religion that existed that had some kind of like high functioning administrative wing. They had some emissary that hung out in his court and told him what Christianity thought of this, or what Islam thought of that, or any of these things. Like, there was a way to account for all of these things, and he listened to all these people, and he had people teaching him fucking every language.
There's a reason people were writing poems about him.
I know, right? I mean, he wasn't just like, the son of the great conqueror. He was actually like a very shrewd philosopher and tradesman and dealer of deals.
Yeah, that is interesting how.
But even a guy like that who could bring the world to him felt trapped.
Yeah, I think that's the inevitability of that type of thing, where people want to bring you down. Not everybody, but somebody is going to want to bring you down, just because some people like to watch the world burn, man.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, the fact that those people exist is what makes humans chaotic in the worst way. But then it's like the people who then burn shit down when they're celebrating, is that chaotic in the best way, or is it just rationalizing that behavior, because I'm not sure that I think that's the type of locus of ethics on which that thing exists. It's like, and then it's not necessarily just pure creation on the opposite end either. It's like the opposite of somebody who burns something down for the fuck of it is not somebody who paints something just for the sake of it necessarily. Yeah. That's not necessarily how
Dada. I read about the Dada parties where
that's
they
a whole different
where
thing.
they would create something just to burn it down.
Exactly.
But that's like
that's a whole different level.
That's like several levels beyond what
that's like the same shit as like a mandala, same mandala, but placed in modern context using modern methodology.
That's one of those things that I often have to remind myself is that I'm viewing through a very vastly different lens than what can even approach the reality of a situation or of a time or its context or any of that. We're always looking at some kind of weirdly curated presentation. I was thinking about the pursuit of history and like understanding history, and I feel like even if you went to school and got a doctorate in some kind of historical studies, you'd really only have a limited picture of what's really happening. Mm-hmm. And so you'd almost have to go to like, the top regional historical program all over the country just to get, even a little bit close. And then from there, you got sound?
Yeah, it's just not very loud.
Oh, let me go turn that up.
Test. Yeah, there we go. That's better. Much better. It's not peaking either.
Is it comfortably loud?
Yeah, I think it sounded like it was in a
I moved everything
telephone.
around it. I might have.
Telephone booth.
Does it still sound like a telephone booth?
No.
I moved everything around and I disconnected everything, so I may or may not have turned everything down. I don't know.
Like, I know you speak quite like softly, but it was I could barely hear you. Like I can hear you better than that.
Hear you, yeah, clearly. Well, yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
So what I was saying is that one would have to go to pretty much every regional, the top tier historical program, and then go to every satellite to make sure that everything was covered. And this is like a lifelong pursuit just to get a really accurate picture of the history from multiple perspectives just within our own country. Mm-hmm. And I'm really only talking about like the last 200 years, because I don't feel like there are really accurate records even going back to 200 years.
No.
I mean, I feel like things like census, that's just kind of a joke until you get to the information age and have computing. All of this like paper documentation, that's just...
Well, in a lot of cases, it was meant to obscure and obfuscate people's capacity to keep lineage.
Yeah.
Especially
and also to identify certain groups of people.
Yeah.
So
it's not something that's meant to do anything but reinforce the patriarchy, and that's kind of where I think people get upset with trying to fall back on these records as valid, because then you look at like for example, African context. So as an African American, quote unquote, I can't really use 23andMe to find my genetic history, because they don't track things the same way in the sense of lineage. It's not geographically based in Africa, it's tribally based. So that's where
And
there's like
tribes that move around through regions.
right, but they also have kept their history intact in a lot of these cases. So that's where there's African ancestry or whatever, and that's kind of
So when I went to China, I didn't see anyone that I looked similar to until I was in Hong Kong, like smack in the middle of Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the case for you? Like
Yeah.
If you went to Africa, would you be able to?
I can.
Would you fit in?
They tell me too, because then that's one of the things I wanted to do with my trips in Africa. I wanted to be open to have somebody be like, "You're part of our tribe," because I can see it, and it only happened in one place, really, in the sense of that's why I'm like, "Oh yeah, this is where."
Yeah.
But then, part of that is you can see things in like people's head shapes, like Nigerians have a similar head shape. My head shape is not a Nigerian head shape.
Yeah.
My head shape's closer to a Ghanaian, but I don't think I'm Ghanaian.
Yeah.
I think I may have connections, like based on my travels, I feel like I have the most connections to Kenyan, like genetics.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, it's more so, one of the things that happens is your genetics don't necessarily determine your connection to the planet.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I have.
Well, yeah, we know our skin color is based largely on our eye color, based largely on our latitude and geographic location and exposure to sunlight, and that takes a while to really alter the outcome. But eventually, if a genetic line were to stay in a different region of the world for long enough, melanin concentration would change,
Mm-hmm.
the eye color tonality would shift. And it has nothing to do with actual genetics. It's just well, it does. It has everything to do with genetics, but it's the response to sunlight.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
And that's kind of cool.
Yeah, but then on top of that, I think what ends up happening is, obviously your DNA is effectively a history of your evolution as an organism from inception, as a a fucking single cell amoeba, effectively. Yeah. So then what ends up happening is, I think when you have ancestors who have had strong ties to certain areas, your DNA becomes more activated when you get close to those areas. So sure. It feels like a religious experience in some ways, but in the way that...
Yeah, in southern China, I didn't have any allergies to anything. Like, I could just breathe.
Shit like that.
Like, my sinuses, were completely open, and for the first time in my life, I could, breathe, and I could tell that I could smell in, stereo, and I was, getting directional information about where whatever that, noodle smell, that pork chop and Hong Kong noodle place. My dad and I went looking for noodle places, and we went basically on a little walking tour of Hong Kong looking for those.
Yeah.
And I could, identify which direction I needed to go because my sinuses were working. My nose was working. My entire olfactory system was working. And all my life, people would be like, "Oh, you can only use one nostril at a time." It's like, no.
Who says that?
I don't know. People who have been told that they can only use one nostril.
Probably never learned how to play an instrument either.
Sure.
Because it's those are the people who don't know about circular breathing and shit. Where There are breathing techniques where I'm like, no, that's 100% not true.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, you can breathe in and out and never actually stop if you learn how to do it correctly in a way that, I think it was Kenny G held a note for 30 minutes without breaking the note.
Yeah.
Or something, maybe it was 30 or 40 minutes.
I'm pretty sure he's the world record holder for longest sustained note.
He is. So. And it was in the 90s when he did it.
Yeah.
Because of circular breathing. And this is one of those techniques is when you learn to play saxophone, you learn about it because of this world record that he set. But then this gets back to the whole notion of people
that technique has existed for a long time before Kenny G. He didn't just divine the technique.
Of course, no. But that's how it manifested into mainstream culture in the West. But this is what I was gonna say is that there's all these common understandings of how things work that are wrong, in the sense of you hear things like, oh, you can only use 10% of your brain at a time, which is complete fucking nonsense. The issue,
no, we use like the entirety of our brain all the time.
Yeah. So it's what ends up happening is you just never get everything lit up at once, because that would it just overheat the same as a computer would.
That would be an electrical storm. That's like a full-on epileptic seizure.
Exactly.
That's not supposed to happen. That's when your processor
or you get KO'd or something. It's like,
well, I think that's when all the lights turn off.
I mean, but it's because everything is overloaded in many ways.
Yeah.
And that's, in the sense of whether it's your pain receptor or your equilibrium receptor, you get KO'd because something gets overloaded to the point of not being able to handle it, and it shuts off. It shuts off everything.
Your internal gimbal rides the entire wall of one side of itself, and it doesn't know which way is anything. So it's like, I'm gonna lay down.
Yeah. I mean, that's one, and there's some. I mean, not so many. There's multiple ways to get knocked out.
And there's the one where
out.
Your nervous system gets overloaded, and it's just can't do anything. So it's like, sorry, I'm out.
Yeah, because those are like knockouts. Because then there's chokeouts, which is almost the opposite.
Yeah, that's slowly checking out. Yeah. You're like, oh, there it goes.
Yeah, and the fade out is. It's like a fade to black that happens on a movie editing or whatever, versus the flash KO where everything just goes white and you
wake up.
Well,
and you're like, what happened?
There's different levels of it, because sometimes people don't go out when they don't. Their body doesn't go out, but their mind and vision goes out. Because I've had that happen to me.
Yeah.
Where I got dumped on my head on concrete, and all my vision went white, and I was still talking apparently, but I don't remember talking. So that's kind of where my body didn't go out. But I was out.
That's a short circuit of serious proportion right there.
But even in that, I was making jokes while I was not able to remember it, So again, that's where
the lights are on, but nobody was home.
Oh, that's funny, because that's close to what it was. I think I said, I can't see. Oh wait, here comes the color, and that's where it was like, I don't remember any of that, but that's what people were laughing, but also freaking out, because it was like I had to go to the hospital and get a CAT scan, and I ended up getting my testing for my license that same day. Yeah, because I was determined. I'm like, even though this happened, I'm not gonna let this fucking shit pass up, and I'm not gonna reschedule.
Oh man, I think that there's, now that we know that the injury from concussions is just cumulative, and that every concussion makes it easier for each successive concussion to happen at a lower threshold of impact. And I'm still surprised that there isn't more concern for youth head injuries.
Well, it's because these people don't actually care about kids. They just say they do for their convenience of arguments. Because I ended up quitting football during, I think, I quit after my sophomore year in high school, because I felt a brain injury in that I played both ways. I was starting as a sophomore, and then I just remember one time there was a head-on head collision where I had to go sit out for a few plays, and then because I didn't puke, the coach put me back in. And then they were just like, don't go to sleep on the way home, so you don't die. You might die if you go to sleep, but they let us keep playing the game. If you got a concussion, they take you out for a few plays, and then if you could still see, they put you back in.
Wow.
And that's probably still how it goes. But that's where, even back then, that's when the wrestling team was cutting weight by riding stationary bikes in garbage bags, That's because they didn't have the sweatsuits yet, so they just fucking taped garbage bags on. They had to, they were ghetto rigging this shit before the sweatsuits existed. And this is when kids were dying, and this is in the sense of, that's why I mean, like, they don't give a fuck about kids. They just use, these are the same kids that if one of them is a prospect for NFL, they'll treat that kid like gold and treat everybody else like shit, and then try to come get benefit off that kid, where then they make it seem like it's worth it because that kid's paying you know, an alumni fucking thing to the school, and they're like, look, he gives $1 million a year because he played football. All these 395 other kids who came through and got concussions and are now in nursing homes at age 45, fuck those kids, because this one kid can now give us money. And that's kind of, I think, how we look at exploiting these people, because you have these game life cycles
how
are
we
not
supposed to
long.
know who the next college football superstar is going to be if they don't filter them out in high school, right? I mean, they've got to maintain this really fucked up industry.
High school, that's late, man.
No, I
Middle
know.
school and elementary
Middle
school,
school, elementary school.
That shit's been getting scouted.
Sure. So if this is all an industry at this point.
Yeah.
And child labor laws don't extend this deep. And
that's exactly right. That's
what it is. This is an issue of child labor.
Man.
Because I know that once kids get to college, that's when they start getting the endorsement deal. That's when they start getting real money.
Now they can get paid in California.
Now they can get paid.
Which kids are going to start flocking to California, of course. Mm-hmm. Which is, I mean...
So California is going to take over Alabama's sweet role of having a football program with an extracurricular education.
And then obviously other states are going to change that rule really quickly. But it wasn't like they weren't getting paid in the first place. The whole Blue Chips movie, do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
That whole thing was about the reality of them paying people under the table. Even here at IU...
Well, there was a bunch of them in that era. That was a basketball movie, right?
Yeah.
There was also a football movie.
The Program.
The Program.
Yep.
I remember watching that and
because they let them run rampant.
Yeah, I remember thinking, it's like, holy crap! I've seen like college students doing that shit like through town, and it like explained, you know, some things to me. On some level, I thought it was like
it's exaggerated. Somewhat.
Well, yeah, but like, but some of it's real.
It is, because I okay, now it's been long enough. I tutored for the IU football team for a couple of guys, and part of it was the dudes I tutored just wanted me to do their homework for them, and I'm like, I'm not gonna, you know, that's not what I'm here for. So then they complained and got me replaced. So then I'm like, I'm not gonna, you know, if this is what it's all about, I'm not gonna continue this shit.
Yeah.
Because they, instead of reprimanding the kids for asking for somebody who's gonna do their homework for them, they just replaced me.
Yep. Yep. Well, you were not a good fit for the machine.
No, because then on top of that, I think one of the things they were most concerned with is if I was finding out if one of the students was, or one of the players was injured or something, so then I didn't get that information out. That's what they were more concerned with than anything.
Huh.
Not about if the student's actually doing their own fucking homework or not. And that's why I'm like, this is a crazy machine. Because then I'm tutoring this kid who's driving a car that's way nicer than mine. You know, he doesn't do his own fucking homework, but he comes in and plays this goddamn game a couple of times, a year, basically.
Well, it does whenever, like, the rival team has to play in Indiana. You know, it's a way to pull money out of that town's economy and into Bloomington. It's a siphon.
Right.
So it's a very subtle form of economic engagement.
Mm-hmm.
It's not full-blown economic warfare, but...
Well, but then you see in other places, like France, for example, what they do is they shut down every province once a month, but they don't shut down the provinces all at the same time. So then, if your province is shut down for that month, you're with your family, but you have to travel to a different province to get your shit, like for grocery shopping, for fun, for entertainment. But it's like a 20-minute drive, or no more than like a 40-minute drive. So it's not like you have to do 3 hours to do this. You just have to go a little bit out of your way, but it forces you out of your shit.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where, when you find out, I didn't know about this practice until I went and did an exchange program as a kid. But then you try to explain that shit to Americans, and people don't think that shit's real.
But that actually sounds kind of cool.
It's awesome. It's fucking awesome.
Makes you
because you hang out with your family. Like, it was so cool to be there during one of those times, because then all we did was hang out with it was a foreign exchange thing where the family wasn't out working all the time.
Yeah.
Because even when they were working, they come home and eat. They come home and eat lunch every day.
Yeah.
They don't eat lunch at work with their fucking coworkers or at a restaurant. It was a really different experience to see, because things were closer in proximity, what people were capable of doing as far as a better integrated family unit. Like, there was a way closer family unit because of not having so much of your day consumed by commuting and work. And then to be forced to take a month off of work every year to specifically be with your family is something where, again, we don't even have that shit gets ridiculed here. Oh, fucking socialist. Like, no, it's not socialist. It has nothing to do with it actually forces capitalism, because then it makes you go put your money in.
I'm pretty sure that's like awesomeism.
Yeah, I don't know if there's really a word to describe.
It's awesome,
because it forces the migration of capital.
Yeah,
it keeps capital moving, in that it doesn't allow any province to fall behind, because say your province is one of the colder provinces. Well, if your shit happens during the warmer part of the year, then you throw a festival. It happens colder part of the year, you throw a snow festival. So it's like, whatever happens, because you have people from your local area that are going to be forced to come into your area because their local shit is like, they have to take a holiday, it doesn't actually end up hurting the commerce in the long run. It enables like a surge of commerce, which is where it doesn't seem like that, but this is where, if you're only looking at it from a single province fucking angle, then you're missing the fact that all these other provinces are gonna have like the same shit happen, so they're gonna have to.
So in a sense, like collegiate athletics provides the same kind of economic engine as semi-regular shutdown of localized economies, because it forces economic mobility to spread out, but it also has its own self-limiting factor that you have to meet a certain threshold just to participate.
Yep.
So it prevents people who can't really afford to participate from making, expenditures that they shouldn't.
Yeah.
So in a sense, it's not a bad thing. It's just a way to move money around. Provided that it's self-sustaining and that it doesn't take away from, so that it's actually putting money into other aspects of the college or university that hosts them. Because otherwise, they might as well just be a professional organization.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're a professional organization, then I feel like that means that they don't have like the same kind of requirements.
That's where like institutes and think tanks and it varies down to NGOs that get really specific, but this is where the institutes and think tanks cover that gap between university, institution, and
private organization.
Yeah.
But can a think tank have a football team?
I think technically they could, but I think that they would not be able to compete in Division A unless they met certain requirements.
Like size.
They'd have to be able to, you have to be able to take classes in it or something.
Yeah.
Just because that's the thing. Just because it's a think tank doesn't prevent it from giving classes.
So what if the think tank has let's say 40 hours of required classes before you can apply for a position at the think tank? and there's a way to get federal funding to take these
But
classes.
then it transcends and becomes a full-on university anyway.
Okay.
That's the difference between, like, once... This is the problem with trying to say, oh, it's still a think tank. Well, once you have all these things, then it's actually qualifies as a university, so it's a full-on university.
Huh.
It just happens to have a think tank. Because this is the difference between research universities and fucking application universities that like, you know, you might have...
Specialize in physics.
Well, those might be research universities still, because then it's like, I'm trying to think, I guess it would end up being more of the STEM stuff, and ends up being like, not as much, you know, funding research, because the issue is the research universities allow professors to not teach all the time.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where, again, otherwise, if you're in a non-research university, you're probably teaching a full load, but you're also not getting time to research your own material. But
That's like, well, no, that's an important distinction, because not all facets of academia and education can be centered around educating. Some of it has to be about discovery and
Right.
and exploration of concepts. Without that, then it's really just kind of what do they call it when you're just fed information and expected to memorize? It's
regurgitation.
yeah,
Or,
indoctrination.
yeah, it's definitely indoctrination.
There has to be some.
It's the difference between recall and reconstruction.
Yeah.
That's from understanding. Because if you're just remembering facts, that doesn't mean you actually understand.
Yeah, it's the recitation.
It's like somebody asked me how motion detectors work, and without Googling it, I was able to explain it to them in the sense of, okay, in my head, I'm like, okay, this thing is there, so it must work this way. And it's like, it's not like I can't say I don't know, but in the sense of...
It has a photoresistor of some kind, and it's got a lens, and if the lens sees something, if the light conditions change enough for the photoresistor, then it completes a circuit.
But it has to have infrared and do body heat, so that it doesn't do false positives from bugs.
So then it's got multiple sensors. It's got a photoresistor and a thermistor and some kind of other system.
And I explained that, and then I went.
It might have multiple.
I went and checked it, and it was exactly right.
Yeah.
So, because this is where, if you understand how something works and what it's meant to do, then you can explain to somebody why a motion sensor is not going off when a bug flies by, and how it works without having to Google it. But that's the difference between
it has
reconstruction
minimum
versus
threshold.
free recall.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There's a minimum threshold, and exactly like, say you have a cat, you're supposed to put it at a certain height, so the cat doesn't set it off. And if it's a dog, and it's because of their body mass.
Yep. I've got a LED solar LED light, and for the longest time it's been great, but the trees have finally grown up sufficiently around it that it's not getting enough sunlight to fully recharge. And it also happens to be positioned over one of the railing from the ramp in the back, so the cats always set it off by walking on the railing to try to see into the window. So it was great for a while until the cats figured out how to turn the light on all the time. Bastards.
Yeah. We'll turn on lights and opening doors.
They're so smart.
Yeah.
Like, why do they got to be so smart? Yeah, it's it's getting chilly out at night, and we don't want to leave Rambo out all the time because he's not a big cat. He just thinks he's a badass. He's kind of a badass, but he's not a big cat, so just not.
I'm gonna have to fight a possum or something.
Yeah, something dumb. And so I try to keep him inside, but he's really sneaky, and he gets out like all the time. So I go outside every so often and let the dog out, and Rambo's sitting on the back deck. It's like, fucking cat, how the hell did you get out here? And then I do like the rounds through every room to see if there's like an open window that has the screen side, like the screen isn't shut. It's like, no, they're all closed. How's he even getting out?
However he wants to.
Man, there's something about cats that I want to understand, but I know if I understand it and it ruins the mystery about them, it'll just make me mad. So I don't pursue it.
Yeah, I mean, I think their origin story of just domesticating themselves is really interesting.
Did we aid in their domestication,
Nope.
or did they?
Nope, they 100% domesticated themselves.
So, did they actually teach us how to live with them?
Basically.
So they domesticated us.
Basically, which is why, I mean, that's part of it. Which is why they still, to this day, are only... You have these people who are doing the studies about bonding with cats, and it's, you know, they're saying that the cat bonds are secure and insecure, and the insecure bonds are if the cat doesn't trust that the owner or cohabitor is going to not leave them. But it's like, you didn't need a fucking study to know that. You know, you just, if you actually
Just pay
have a
attention to
cat, then you understand that bond is there in the same way that the shit happens with a kid or a dog or any animal that has some sense of self-awareness is going to feel abandoned if you leave it. And I think that's where the idea that cats could never feel abandoned or something, it's a really weird notion that people just thought cats couldn't, you know, I guess didn't have the capacity to form bonds. This is something stupid, it seemed.
Yeah, I remember when I was in high school, I read a research paper about the toxicity and lethality of dihydrogen monoxide. And I thought, wait, somebody had to dissect this through science to understand how dangerous water is? And, you know, I mean, I think the thing that I remember the most clearly was it only takes 2 inches of water, standing water, to drown in. That's not a lot. That's like a pothole or a puddle.
Yeah.
So, but it took research to understand the dangers and lethality of dihydrogen monoxide.
Somebody got a grant for that.
Somebody got a grant for that. Somebody read it. Somebody on the internet read it and got all huffy puffy about it.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting now that it's funny to think of internet activism is kind of okay. The activists aren't stopping, but the idea of it having any impact has definitely waned. And then in that, I'm trying to get a sense of, you know, there's not many ways to get a message across about an issue anymore
Without it being completely co-opted by private interest.
Yeah, and then on top of that, anything that looks like a fad can a lot of times just be constructed by a private interest that's not real. So it's hard to tell. Like that woman who came to the town hall meeting and was talking about eating babies, and it was obviously a fucking plant. But then for like the first 4 days of the news cycle, you have people who are questioning why the lady wasn't shouted down immediately, and it's like, clearly this is a plant, and the information for whatever reason just hasn't come out that she's a plant. So then the information finally comes out that she's a plant. So then all the people who were trying to make a stink about it in the first few days, trying to say like, oh, why didn't AOC come out and rebuke her immediately? And then to see the notion of, if the woman was mentally ill and had gone up there and started talking about eating babies, what, we're supposed to antagonize mentally ill people now? That's the response to, like, it doesn't, the initial response of the way people were saying to handle it, when you have somebody who's clearly a planted troll or mentally ill, it's one or the other. She's obviously not serious. She's either a troll or mentally ill. You just ignore that shit if you can, if it's not in harming anybody. There's no reason to actually engage it and dignify it with any sort of response. So when we have this happening...
Well, this is what I was saying the other day about hecklers. Like, they're the first people to make their opinions known. Mm-hmm. Their opinions can't possibly be based in any kind of fact or reality. It's just some kind of, high broadcast signal of projection, being a dick, their own insecurities, any of those things. And what they reveal is that they aren't really fit to be a part of any dialogue. These are they're issuing some kind of hyperbolic reaction to, like you say, a person who is mentally unstable, who probably has no idea where they are at any given point. That's like a burn 'em at the stake kind of reaction. Yeah, we're way past witch trials. We don't need to be.
Are we though?
I mean, we're supposed to be. I mean, we might not be, but we're supposed to be. I mean, I don't like the terms witch hunt or lynching, because those are terms that come from the language of the oppressor.
But people who did both of those literal things, whether it's McCarthyism or full-on lynchings, are still alive.
I know.
And they're on the internet now.
Yeah.
And they try to digitally lynch people.
But they're
thing.
co-opting the kind of terror that was inflicted upon people of color, like of black men, primarily in this country, and they're saying that they are now being treated similarly. And that
of course,
that's
not true. Of course, they don't believe that.
They can't possibly. But it's the language that they're using is extremely oppressive, because it strips people and their families of, all of it. It takes that in, like, the pain and or suffering of persecution, and minimizes it to this thing that is equivocal to some guy in power feeling like they're having their feelings hurt over some disagreement of interpretation of words.
Have you read 1984?
Yeah,
it's fucking doublespeak, man.
Of course,
they know what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing, because in doing that, it's the same way. If you and I discuss the issues of what minorities have to face in America, now we're racist for looking at it from the issues of minorities. That's how you reframe words. That's their racism.
Yeah. Or wait, it's the other one I read about, calling somebody a class traitor. That's like a variation on the theme. So if somebody who comes from upper class and has all the money and resources and access to networks of resources, if they, lo and behold, wake up someday and decide that they're going to advocate policy that helps their workers and does not ensure the legacy of the family and or of the network of people whose resources are being utilized to create this other economic empire, they are now a class traitor. Or like people who get to a certain point and then advocate against the things that got them there. These are considered to be class traitors. And I think that it's we're at a very strange place, because class mobility in this country isn't what it used to be, and I don't think it ever actually was what it was purported to be.
There's only that
it only exists
for a brief period of time. Yeah.
Like
and
6 or 7 years, maybe.
Partially because men were off to war.
Yeah.
They took all the dudes out of the economy, and that started the class mobility for all the housewives. into actual workforce, and then once the women were in the work, this is literally how it happened, which is fucking insane that this is only in the last really 100 years. But then all the women in the workforce, God forbid, they demand better conditions.
Well, being paid 60 to 70 cents on the dollar if you're a white woman versus, and not even factoring in what if you're an Asian woman or a black woman or a Hispanic woman versus like the white man's dollar.
Well, it's funny though, because white men aren't actually the most
now it's Asian men are the most well paid.
It's been that for a while.
Well, I think it was not the case until they started adding Asian men into the equation.
Right. I mean, and exactly. Yeah.
If Asian men had been in part of that calculus the entire time, it would have had them at the top.
What ends up happening is there's not enough poor Asian men relative in the same way that there are poor white men, because you have to effectively be rich to migrate here now.
Yeah.
Or immigrate.
Yeah.
You can't do it legally unless you're rich already.
By executive order, you have to have health insurance, existing health insurance to immigrate to the United States now.
Yeah. I mean, fuck health insurance. I think you have to have.
No. This is recent. This is like in the last 48 hours.
But it's like, it's between 40 and 250 grand at any given time that you have to have just sitting in your bank account.
To come to this country, you have to have almost $1 million in equity.
Yeah. I mean, in equity, but just in cash.
I know, just in equity.
In cash, then, it's like varies between 40 grand and 250 grand.
And so that's part of the whole Chinese food coming to America package. It costs anywhere from $1 million to $2 million to take over someone's Chinese restaurant. And then at the end of it, you sell it to the next family for $1 to $2 million, however much you put into it.
Yeah.
So they have the equity that's built into a system that generates local currency that they get to utilize while juniors in school. And then when their kid goes on to the next level of education, they sell the restaurant, go to the next city, buy another restaurant, run the same basic, It's the classic Chinese money laundering scam.
I mean, it's not
Chinese restaurant money laundering.
it's not money laundering.
I know it's not.
It's keeping money in the community, and the issue is, one of the things I've heard is like, what you're talking about is segregation.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've heard framed is that desegregation has been one of the worst things for the black economy. And upon hearing it at first,
it sounds like a what the fuck?
Exactly. But then when you realize what ends up happening when people are segregated by their culture or race, then it allows them to be able to keep their money in their own community in a way that I think it was a trigger warning elucidated, like, the black dollar leaves the black community within, I think, like 6 minutes or something, and then within the Asian communities, they keep it within their, like, a dollar stays within the Asian community on average. I think it was like 6 to 12 months or something.
Really?
It's like something ridiculous. Like,
that's like
something stupid where you're like,
that's like
what?
an order of magnitude timescale difference.
Yeah. It's something stupid different where it doesn't even make any sense.
That's the difference between like a bug's life and a very small mammal's life.
Because then what they did was show, like, one of the things he tried to do was buy black-owned weed at the time, or black-owned soda or black-owned beer. And then what's happened is there's apps now that make it a lot easier to find black-owned businesses, but the cultural perception of not having black-owned...
A little black book.
Right, basically. I mean, but then the issue is, like...
The black pages.
Because there's broken continuity of black business ownership, it's seen as inferior by their own culture. So because there's never been broken Asian business. Like, if Vietnamese moved here, then they had business ever since they moved here. If Chinese moved here, they had business ever since they moved here, and it stayed within the like you say, they sell it, but the business itself
It's still
keeps
intact.
Exactly.
They're passing on a completely intact turnkey
and it never
business.
got bombed. Those things
Yeah.
never got actively destroyed. Nobody ever put crack in the fucking Chinese communities. So this is where it's one of these things where people then try to turn around. You have this weird group of people who try to turn around because they don't actually understand. They don't care to learn the history of what's happened in the black community.
Yeah.
And these are the same people that believe in the Illuminati, but don't believe that the fucking CIA was distributing crack in black communities, that there was active ad campaigns to put cigarettes in black kids' hands that weren't happening in white or Asian communities in the same way. There weren't fucking Newport ads in Chinese neighborhoods. There weren't Newport ads in white neighborhoods. They were in the fucking black neighborhoods.
If you want to see the cigarette ads for Chinese people, you kind of have to go to China.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
I don't see any. I've never seen a cigarette billboard targeting anyone but white or black people. And then with black people, it was almost always Newports or Cools.
Yep.
And with it was always like some kind of light cigarette for pretty much white men. Occasionally, I remember seeing like poster size ads for those really thin pencil-looking cigarettes that you see.
Virginia Slims.
Yeah, the ones that like older women smoke at casinos.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's so funny how much stuff is about perception. Like the person who smokes those think that they're smoking more tobacco because it smokes long, or they just want to smoke it longer. Or what, you know? This is weird. Everybody wants their own thing when it's like they also don't want to roll their own.
You know, when we were going to IU, I remember for a period of time I was into the hand-rolled cigarettes because the tobacco that I was getting
was better. It's way better.
It was a fancy
It
tobacco.
tastes way better.
Tasted really rich. It had this like dimensional flavor. It didn't have all these weird chemical flavors going on. And at one point, I remember I went through a phase of like trying to figure out how much tobacco I actually needed, and I realized it was a lot less than I thought it was. To have like a properly burning cigarette that wouldn't go out. And people would go, oh yeah, let me roll one. And they would roll these gigantic like hog leg cigarettes, like cigar sized cigarettes. And it's like, man, are you even going to be able to keep that going? Like, and of course the answer is no, because it's too thick of a smoke, and people are just like, oh, fuck this, I can't smoke this. But it was really interesting, like, to get to the point where you're smoking hand-rolled cigarettes, like that's like a very conscious decision, and then to be able to dial it in, that's like another thing. And I think that our society doesn't really have any really good inbuilt systems to regulate. You only have to regulate once you go too far.
Yeah.
Like a culture of moderation, I'm sure it exists somewhere, like, but it's not mainstream.
Yeah.
The mainstream culture is to consume, enjoy, instant gratification.
And I don't think it was always that way.
Yeah, I don't think it was always that way either. I think it had to get to the point where it is somehow.
Yeah.
And we watched it happen, but I don't think it's always been this way.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much of it came from MTV Cribs and that whole bling period, where I feel like bling becoming a thing that just drove humanity in this weird direction. A super weird direction. People used to have a gold tooth
or a chain,
a diamond in their tooth, and then they'd have a couple chains. You know, somebody had a gold tooth, they probably had 2 or 3 chains. If somebody had a chain, they maybe had a ring,
or 2.
And a bracelet.
Yeah. Or a watch.
And then some people would have like 6 chains and look like rap stars or Mr. T. And that's the difference between Mr. T and just some rapper.
Yeah.
Like, but then it got to this point where people had gold teeth, like all their teeth gold, the grills, and then diamonds in the grills. And it gets to a point where it's like
diamond in the cheek.
Right. I understand going to excess. Now that we've gone there, where are we now? Because then you have the 6ix9ine.
It's like Glam 2.0. Well, he's like Glam X dot something else.
Right, and that's what I mean in the sense of it became this thing of when you go from Rakim and Chuck D and Guru
Guys
and
that
Common,
like where it was like the quality of the
Talib
sunglasses
Kweli
and the
Mos
quality
Def.
of the artwork on their hoodie or their jacket and the fact that their shoes were fresh and that's a very different look.
And again, I don't even know. You can't really blame rap for the bling culture because that was the MTV Crib shit.
Even before
happened.
that, there was glam rock.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And that was a generation.
I don't know if you had to necessarily be rich to do do rock.
Yeah,
though.
but it was still about like shiny, sparkly. Look at me. It was opulence culture to extreme. It glorified donning makeup and crazy hair and glitter everything and. That was like the supreme opulence phase of rock and roll. And I feel like bling is the opulence phase of hip hop.
Right.
But what we've got now with this face tattoos and
well, I mean, but face tattoos don't even make any sense. I saw this dude.
No, I know. That's what I mean. It's like
he had teardrops on his cheek. Like by his sideburns.
But did he kill people to get those?
No, of course not.
Well,
of course not. You're not gonna be out and like you can't do that in 2019.
Yeah, no.
But they weren't even teardrops by his eyes. It's teardrops by his fucking sideburns. That's not a teardrop. Then it's like a sweat bead.
He's got a sweat bead.
He's got like 6 sweat beads on his fucking cheek. But then I'm like, that's why if you get a fucking teardrop, but it's not on your eye, it's not a teardrop then. And it's a sweat bead, so if you got the whole point was, if you got people getting teardrop tattoos who've never killed anybody,
then it doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't. The whole teardrop thing was supposed to have a meaning, and obviously it got to a point where rappers were doing it just to be cool, and now you have people.
I wonder if that aspect of the culture has also adopted the spider web on the elbow.
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure.
But they get it other places. They get it like on their shoulder blade.
But that's also supposed to represent time spent in prison, right? Is the spider web or something like that?
Yeah, but it's supposed to be on the elbow. I thought.
It's on the elbow.
Yeah, there's a specific one, and that's kind of again where they'll start getting it in other places, where it's not a problem, but they just took something and then they're like, oh, I'll get a spider web, but on my neck.
You know, and
it's like this is my version of, and it's like then you're not unique for doing that.
I was talking to a buddy of mine who works in education. Like I can't remember, intermediate, high school, and he was telling me that like he told some kid to pull his pants up and explained the history of where sagging comes from, and he was then explained to by a different educator that times have changed and they don't want to push that anymore, that it's more acceptable for kids to walk around with their pants down a little bit. And I'm thinking, it's like, but wait, how did they nerf sagging like that? How did this even happen? This can't possibly be the case. Like, I feel like the insistence that the origins are somehow no longer part of the narrative is...
Well, I think part of it was because the origins were overblown.
Yeah.
There's like a whole essence of trying to like demean black culture that was in the creation of like, yeah, there were like a lot of stuff that is not necessarily wrong with that narrative, but it's overblown how much it actually existed.
Yeah.
And that's the same, in the culture of like
I remember seeing a documentary, and it was basically like one dude who was really like responsible in one prison for like, this is what sagging means, and he was talking about how like if he saw someone sagging their jeans, that's what he knew, that they were ready.
Right.
But it was like one guy that they focused on.
That's kind of where the whole thing.
And then at another prison, there was one guy who was like that,
Yeah.
And it was always like, they were always be tough as nails, of course.
Well, and people didn't actually used to be able to fact check shit.
Yeah.
And so stuff would, one thing would start here, and then it becomes urban legend, and then it becomes fact.
That's the thing. Even within this documentary that supposedly goes to various prisons and interviews like the population to find that one.
Talking about the booty warrior.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Every prison had their own booty warrior. There was to some degree or another. But he was the booty warrior.
This is okay. Is this the prison culture, or is this black culture being against homosexuality and then having to have somebody who becomes a booty warrior in the sense of like they're actually a gay dude who just happens to be now in a prison context, who's basically like making the best of his situation.
See, that's what I thought it was. I thought
that's what it's. You can't tell retrospectively which one it is.
No, exactly. But that's the thing is like the way that they present it is like at every prison you'll find some guy who's getting it on with other dudes.
Yeah.
And that's how they let each other know. So it's not a. It's a gay culture thing within prison, and at least in the context of the booty warrior, it's a black man, right?
I mean, yeah, but that's where again, I think
that's just a narrative at that point that's giving us this version of history.
Yeah, and that's it comes from. There was like a specific book that created this narrative that was then proven to not have a factual connection to whatever it was trying to say.
So it was fiction at this point.
Basically. I mean, because in that book was also trying to talk about how much, like, sexual assault there was in male prisons, and they just made shit up, basically. So that was like, the whole people who wrote that book were then exposed to have been white supremacists that had white supremacist ties that weren't known when they put it out. So then it like invalidated a lot of their research about prisons, because it wasn't actual research, it was just making shit up.
Yeah. That doesn't surprise me at all. That actually just makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Which, again, I don't, not to condone sagging, but there is a lot of, like, because there's a whole lot of, you'll hear black people saying that same narrative, not to say that the narrative is inaccurate, but its historical origin is questionable. In that, then some people say it goes all the way back to slavery, and that's where, that shit got added on later, too.
I think it could also be that there's, like, a comfortable region where pants just happen to rest on someone's ass, and it's not always above the hips, because our pelvic cages aren't all the same.
Right.
And no one has the same legs and pelvic cage ratio, and muscle development isn't the same, so no one's pants are going to fit the same. And if everyone's essentially wearing pajama bottoms, it's not going to work. Everyone's going to end up wearing pants differently.
I mean, it makes you walk like a pimp. Bottom line, it forces you to walk with a limp, and it makes you walk slow and cool, and that's what happened is like
get that
people
strut.
didn't know how to walk slow and cool, and then the pants force you to. That's it, man. Because otherwise, the capacity for people to run up and like pants you or like kick your legs, you can't run. It's incapacitating to a certain degree, but it forces you to walk a certain way. In that, it then it like you are doing it to attract attention, like whether it's male or female. It's like just because somebody's doing it doesn't mean they're gay. But yeah, they're trying to do it to attract. Of course, everything that males do from like the time they're cognizant to like the time they die is to attract attention in some capacity, whether it's like from their boys or from a like whoever they're attracted to. Yeah. So let's not pretend that's not the case, and I think that's again where, there's this false premise of only young dudes being out to get attention and attract attention when obviously it's, you know, it happens until people die, even down to old people acting out using their disabilities that may or may not exist.
I don't even think it matters if it started within a gay culture of any kind, because gay communities have given us the most forward fashion probably throughout history. I mean, realistically, pop culture looks to gay culture for guidance in so many different ways. Like it's.
I mean, it's only recently.
I know, but maybe
recently.
it's been going on for a lot longer than we.
I don't think so. I don't think so. And I think what ends up happening is the gay influence, I think personally, was used to mask the sexual predators. I don't think that they were actually listening to gay dudes, because when you get to the top of it, Calvin Klein isn't gay. Tommy Hilfiger's not gay.
No.
A lot of these big name designers are not gay, and then the ones you know about that are gay, like the Michael Kors and the Isaac Mizrahis. Oh, guess who happens to be working on a fucking Weinstein show that has women strutting naked all the time and has fucking tons of video of naked women, and that's what I'm like.
Yeah.
You know, on the one hand, it's like, yeah, you want to think that it's not innocuous. It's like people call it gay mafia. But on the other hand, it's straight people using gay mafia as a shield to get all these women to get comfortable and fucking, oh yeah, it's Isaac. Isaac loves dick. He doesn't love your vagina. Yeah, go ahead and take it off in front of the camera. You know what I mean? And it's the same reason these Epsteins had the woman to get the other people comfortable. It's like there is an element of this whole gatekeeping thing. It's not, they didn't create this shit. This goes back to the fucking De Medici adoption of that type of thing in the West, where it's used to like make people, you give a person a little bit of power, they'll start taking advantage of other people to get in better graces with those who have power, to stay in power, and it becomes this thing of like, oh, the doorkeeper.
It's all about gatekeeping of the network.
Yep, and the gatekeeper is the one willing to do the most. Cause then there was like did you ever watch that show Scare Tactics?
Yeah.
So there's an episode where this dude, he thinks he's getting kidnapped by somebody who's gonna fucking turn him into a gimp. And then the dude's like, dance for me, and he's got a little person in the corner in fucking leather he's got his mouth taped up, but he's got a whip that he's whipping at the dude, and the dude's freaked the fuck out. He's like losing his shit. And then one of the first thing he says, "I'll bring people here for you." And that's not the only time you heard that on that show. There's other times where people are like, when they get in that position, they're like, "I'll bring people here for you." And then you're like, whoa, this is how it happens. This is how it happens. Somebody gets put in a sense where they think if they become part of this thing, and then, you know, they do it for 5 or 6 months or however long, or 5 or 6 days or whatever period they think is going to get them out of becoming what they then go and fucking round up, they turn quick. They turn quick. And this whole, like, I don't think it's obviously the whole population, but there's this group of humans. They're weasels, man. This is
just like flat out turn on the person
instantly.
Next to them.
And these are the weasels that make the movie plots where people get double crossed, and you're like, this fucking weasel. It would only be unbelievable if these weasels didn't exist in real life.
Yeah.
But there's these fucking weasels that will like be your best friend until somebody holds a gun to their head, and then they'll fucking turn you over immediately without even fucking thinking about it. And then that's where it's like, what the fuck? You know, this person, these types of people end up making it so it's like, it's hard for anybody to trust anything, because that person always, like, there's these people who do these long cons.
Yep.
And the long con is a real thing. So it's, you know, it ends up being an issue of, like, the more people are aware But then that's also
I
why.
remember years and years and years and years and years ago, one of my associates said, "I can't wait for you to invent something, so that I can fill out that contract and get my 10%." And I remember things like, well, fuck. And then by the time I actually get paid for whatever it is I create, it's been whittled down to like 4%, because everyone wanted their 10%.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really crazy how much.
Can't even make something anymore without having to pay.
I mean, I don't know if you could ever. Well, and this is where
I think maybe back in like the 1600s you could invent something and not have to like,
people
pay
just
the
steal
price. Yeah, well, that's that too.
That's the whole issue of Charles Dickens. He would publish a book, and then people just fucking steal it and print it and be selling his book without his permission and be making money off of selling copies of his book.
Yeah.
So then that's where the copyright law in America ended up being one of the ways to promote people coming here to invent. But now, because there's so much intellectual property
Apparently
theft
during
and IP, like
before the Nazis took over all of Germany, when they were making their big insurgent move into German populations, they would go to local stores and ask if they had a copy of Mein Kampf, and the store owners would be like, "No, I haven't heard of it," and then they would just keep going, sending different groups of people around until the store started carrying copies. And a lot of these copies weren't even published by the same publisher. They were just like printed and distributed all wherever a local print shop was. They would just have them printed out and they would start selling them. It wasn't even like a concentrated effort to use it to generate funds. It was just, how do we get the word out? And I'm surprised that doesn't. I think the internet is actually so vast and infinite in regards that even if somebody were to publish some kind of manifesto like that, it wouldn't actually spread the way that it could have in print form, because it would be adulterated at some point or modified in another way, or it would go through various format conversions so that it would only be legible on certain devices. So maybe that's kind of a good thing. But it also, I just kind of outlined a distribution model right there, so.
I mean, yeah, well, but there's so much shit that gets distributed, it's hard to come to the top in the sea of.
That's right, the cream rises to the top.
Yeah. So I think that's also why, in many cases, somebody's probably putting out 1,000 manifestos right now, but nobody's reading that shit.
Yeah, which one do you want to read?
Nobody's reading the rantings of a crazy white supremacist. Except for other white supremacists.
But those rantings might not be important now, but they might be important in 4 years.
I mean, that's true, but this is also where that is the nature of information, and also relevance, in that nothing is usually immediately relevant unless it's an emergency.
So we need to have like quantum computers performing a review of text and apply heuristics to it so that it can understand what's being said and predict future utility of these words.
I mean, but
not really. That's kind of a terrifying idea.
Well, of course they're already doing that shit.
Yeah.
But the issue is language changes, and this is one of the issues that I think people. There's people who are very rigid.
Yeah, like
or so they want to paint themselves, that are so rigid with the rules of the language. But then in that, it loses its functionality of being able to work in a changing world, in a changing environment. So,
like the word snowflake used to mean in 1860s Missouri was a term applied to anti-abolitionists.
Or gay.
and then eventually became gay.
I mean, I'm saying like
And
gay
then-
didn't. It wasn't that long ago that gay was happy. That was less than 100 years ago.
That's true. That was like
You go back to some Iron Man
no,
shit.
that's
and
like
they're
in
talking
the,
about
even in the 80s.
yeah, exactly, and that's what I mean. Like even I think some Iron Man cartoons. There's like mention of people being, are you gay, and or maybe in the comic book, but
Go have a gay old time.
yeah,
No, that's more like the 50s or 60s.
that's 50s and 60s. But still, that's
Right.
in a fucking theme song.
Yeah.
But even then, that's where
Well, at some point, like all these things change because language is mutable, and it's contextual, and it pinpoints an era in how it's used. It pinpoints to a time,
yeah,
and so something like the English language, which doesn't rely on pitch or tone, that's really can be a matter of fact, like just a utilitarian language. Something like that has the tendency to reveal when it's being used by how it's being used.
mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I think that's where we get this,
like the language of the Emancipation Proclamation today, when I read that not too long ago, I remember thinking, it's like, man, this language isn't being used like this anymore.
yeah,
And then embedded in those words, which seem really, righteous and like, oh yeah, liberty and stuff. It's like, no, you got to sign up for the military.
mm-hmm.
You want freedom, you got to join the army. Which is like, kind of the opposite of freedom.
Yeah,
Joining the socialist organization that blows shit up to be free.
well, then you got a lot of those people who did that and then got land, and then got the land taken away from them later.
Yeah.
Under nefarious circumstances, and then
You can have this land, just move out here and invest your life. Oh, you can't pay taxes? We're going to take it back.
Yeah, I mean, I guess technically it happened to Japanese.
Happened to Chinese people too.
Like in World War II.
Yeah. Happened to the Chinese in the 40s and 50s, I think, or something like that.
Yeah.
It prevented a lot of infusion of resources into the West Coast and forced a lot of Chinese men to join the railroad construction project.
Right. Yeah.
That shit's kind of fucked up. And by kind, I mean like really fucked up. Hey, let's just send him in there. He can blow up this hole. Oh, that's enough. That's enough fuse. He'll be fine. He's quick.
Yeah, that whole period's super questionable. Whether, just building shit by blowing up mountains.
Let's just blow it up with dynamite.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Because then I look at a lot of the pathways that were created and, the routes. And I'm like, man, is this really, like, up this mountain, is this really the way you had to go?
This was the best way imaginable at the time.
Really?
This was a good idea.
But, yeah, I don't know.
There are a lot of decisions that don't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a lot, like...
You can't undo.
Yeah, like, why did Marvel think it was a good idea to hand X-Men over to Fox? And why did they think it was a good idea to hand...
They didn't.
They didn't.
They had no choice.
They had no choice? How did that even happen?
You don't remember that?
No, I
No,
don't.
okay, so this is the fucked up thing about the whole rights shit. So, comic books went through this, like, comic books didn't used to be popular. And then, whenever people started...
See, it's funny because, like, I always enjoyed comic books, so I don't realize that people didn't like them. It's like jazz in high school. Like, if you're into jazz in high school, you probably don't realize that other people don't like it because you're listening to it, and who cares what other people are not listening to?
Right. I mean, but you didn't have the internet to know
that
anyway.
Too.
So,
yeah.
But at the same, what ends up happening is the whole comic book era really comes about for a couple of reasons. Number one, Batman 1989. Number two, collecting had become big, and then like collecting anything. It wasn't just comic books. It was
baseball cards, football cards,
right. And then but it was because antiques.
Yeah.
Like the Antique Roadshow started to become a thing, and then the Superman or Action Comics, 27 sold for $1 million. There was one issue that sold for $1 million in like 1990 or 91 or something. So there was a sequence of events that made comic books popular. They weren't popular until the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
So then what ends up happening is the industry starts upping their output. They start trying to take advantage of this popularity. And what they do is they try to capitalize on the collection thing, so everything gets a number 1 or a 0. So they're trying to make, like, oh, Jubilee gets a fucking own comic book now because issue number 1. Rogue issue number 1. Gambit issue number 1.
But Jubilee was always just a PSA for fire safety.
But she gets her own comic book because the issue is they're trying to capitalize and take advantage of this sudden rise in popularity, and also the notion that people are buying like 2 and 3 copies of the same issue, because this is what the collecting thing is like. You buy a reader, you buy a collector, and then you buy the variant. And it's like there's all these things that are happening. So then by the time the 2000s happen, it's out of control, and the industry's on the decline in the early 2000s because you have 6 and 7 like variant issues that are only variant in the cover, but you might have ones a diamond, a platinum, and then the first 3 are just different artists that might have been valuable in 1997, but now everything has to have 3 different artists, so it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
So then, you throw in CGC comic grading. What ends up happening is throughout the 90s, you get poor reception from movies, and then this declining, in tandem with the declining sales, Marvel Studios has to sell all their properties. And that's like, it was a combination of all those things, because they sold some of them in the 80s when the shit was on the brinks anyway.
So
so it was the movies that saved comic books. So this is always why, like, the X-Men, I hate the X-Men film because of the CGI, but
so
it saved
simply because Fox owned X-Men, and that couldn't possibly have been the entire reason they bought Fox, that Disney bought Fox, right? They had something else going on, or was it just so they get that property so they can add X-Men to the MCU?
I mean, they're getting all of Fox Studios.
I mean, so they're getting all those TV shows, and they're getting a lot of property.
Yeah.
So they didn't just do it just so
No, because I mean, they end up, I think, like, the Ridley Scott stuff is in there, like the Alien stuff is in there. And,
okay.
Yeah, they own a lot of stuff now. They own a lot of IP, which is where it becomes dangerous to allow one production company to have so much IP under their control, but that's also why...
Because I thought for a second there, like, if the whole point was to acquire X-Men, then, like, it's not actually that big of a leap for them to acquire Sony just for Spider-Man at this point.
No, there's no way. There's no way. Yeah, I mean, in another universe, 5 to 10 years ago, they would have been able to make that happen, but Sony's got too much leverage.
Yeah.
This is where the conspiracies about Disney actively working to undermine the Fox IP by doing Rotten Tomatoes shit and having plants on the ratings boards is what contributes to the notion of them acquiring it, knowing that they did have plans from the very beginning. Well, it does make it shady.
It's just
the
like
deleted scenes show they had plans from the very beginning.
It's just like the idea that Mickey Mouse is a robot suit that's being piloted by Walt's brain, and and he's really the.
I mean, there's no question of his brain being frozen.
I know.
That's not even a question. That's the fucked up thing. Is like that's not even. That's not even theory.
No,
That's
no.
real.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty sure that it's been plugged into some kind of like master computer interface, and he's just controlling Disneyland crab machine from deep within the core of the castle.
I mean, if it's ever possible, it would have been possible then. We just wouldn't.
The technology would have been suppressed. No one else needs to know about it because Walt Disney's really the only guy who can afford it.
If it's at all possible, it would have been possible then. It's again like the notion of it having to have
microcomputing.
Right, it doesn't.
It doesn't.
It doesn't.
They could do it with electromechanics.
It could be the whole reason that the Disney complex is as big as it is because it's underground. The entire,
Yeah.
This is where the whole notion of.
Well, maybe the reason that all the technological development towards electromagnetism and like electromechanical systems has been pushed to the side in favor of software and computing systems and information systems is that people can be more easily swayed through information than they can through other types of devices or other types of interaction. Mm-hmm. And so if we knew that there was a life out there where we didn't have to be constantly plugged into the internet, and instead of that we would be stepping through teleportation doorways and being able to fly vehicles that didn't require refueling every other day, or could do all these other things with our time that didn't involve constantly creating content to be used as advertising or marketing material to somebody else. Mm-hmm. I think that there has to be some kind of like a strong reason to push towards the kind of information system that we have now, and I don't think that it's like altruistic anymore. I don't think it's for like the benefit of all mankind.
No, it's for the benefit of the advertisers.
Yeah.
That's it. And not even the companies they're advertising for, is strictly for the advertisers.
Yeah, because you have to go to school. Most people end up having to go to school to understand networking sufficiently so that they could create a small personalized network. But most people never gain the skills to expand the network beyond their own home to connect to another house somewhere else because we don't own the infrastructure. We have to rent the infrastructure from somebody else. But some people are willing to understand how that works. Mm-hmm. I know that I could create a radio, like a two-way radio. I know that I could teach somebody else how to do that. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure that with sufficient materials, I could create like a amplifying system to send that signal longer range. And I could show somebody else how to do that. We could make repeaters and eventually create a network for audio communication. But the difference between that and creating a digital signal to send data is actually kind of significant. Mm. You have to have encoding systems and computers, and I don't think that. Sometimes I think that the kind of specialization of hardware that we have is it's nice but unnecessary.
Yeah. Well, it's a byproduct of
byproduct of
byproduct capitalism, and that's like one of the issues in creating these supply chains that have to exploit every step for profit and not make something that is completely focused on the actual singular product.
Yeah.
Then the singular product loses some elements of being to its full potential for the sake of this process of exploiting every step. And it's not meant for sustainability, it's just meant for pure exploitation, and that's the problem. If it were for sustainability, it'd be a completely different story.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you get these people hearkening back to a time when cars were made of metal and they lasted longer.
They didn't last longer.
I mean,
parts of them lasted longer, but the cars themselves had poor seals, and
it wasn't that they lasted longer. They had the capacity to maintain them themselves.
Yeah, that's true.
So in being able to maintain it yourself, you could have something that you bought and you had for 5 to 10 years, and you were making sure it didn't fall apart because it was accessible enough, and you had enough. Your intersection of your information base was enough that you could fix your own shit, and that's why you had hot rod period where people could modify their own cars. You can't do that now.
It just costs so much money.
You don't have access to the proprietary tools.
Yeah.
Like, you literally can't modify most of the cars in a way
that's meaningful.
Yeah.
You have to buy a specific car from a manufacturer that's designed to be modified.
Yep, and this is the difference between having something that's so specified and specialized that you can't do it without then 100% committing to their paradigm of, like, say you want to refit the front end of your car. Well, your tool set should work for any car for the most part.
Except you have to buy specialized clip release tools.
So there's all these aspects of then trying to create a specific hook so that you have customers having to come back to your company, that then it's just about creating this specific thing so that they're dependent on you forever. And that's kind of where... because everything depends upon finding the most exploitative process, that dependence life cycle is not something that's built into almost every product. It's like there's some sort of failure life cycle built in that's going to keep you using them, but also dependent upon them to maintain or replace. Because, there was a period where if you bought something like a washing machine, they would come to your house and fix it for 25 years for free because it was supposed to not break down. So that's why they could guarantee that they would come.
It's funny that you mentioned washing machines. In England, for the longest time, that was the case. And then somehow, within the last, decade, the laws changed and manufacturers weren't required to support their products for some period of time. And so there's a lot of backlash because people had to buy washing machines every 2 years instead of every 10 years.
Yep.
And so then legislation was passed recently to require them to be able to be maintained. But in the language, it really very clearly indicates that the people who maintain these products are not the end user. That it's a secondary maintenance industry.
They built it in, so they built to just protect another industry now.
Yeah. And, of course, the backlash happens again. It's these people are like, I know how to use a screwdriver.
Right.
I know how to turn off the electricity to the circuit. I'm not paying somebody $200 or 200 pounds an hour to fix my problem with this modular component that I can very well do myself.
Right.
And so it's like...
I mean, it's just like whatever idiot decided to put a washing machine that's a front loader and put the lint trap right in the front instead of on the side. There's these things that are about the design where you look at it and it's like, some fucking asshole did this. They did this to just be a douchebag, because there's some of the things where you're like, why don't you just move this here or move this there? And
no, that's like every time I buy something, some kind of appliance, that all the things that they never tell you have to go through when you get a house. When you buy your home, you will...
I meant to talk to you about this. Do you know what redlining is?
Yeah.
So this is another thing that happens with black people, in that I don't know if I'll ever buy a home in America, because the whole thing is, even if I'm making a ton of money, the banks will try to put me in a poor or exclusively black area. They will not allow me to get a mortgage in a nice place.
I think you just gotta no, there's a way around this, actually.
I don't want to get around the fact that it's there. I don't want to find a way around it. I don't want to fucking support this shit where I have to sneak into homework. Fuck that.
Well, no, it's
because when I applied to purchase a home on the south side, and they tried to put me in fucking Pigeon Hill.
What?
Yeah.
But that's not the south side.
No. You know where Pigeon Hill is. And that's what I mean. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't matter how many degrees you have, what you if you've never been to jail.
Well, I think
if you go to a bank as a black person, they'll take you and try to put you in the ghetto no matter what you are.
But what if a corporation tries to obtain property?
I mean, as long as the corporation is headed by a white guy, it doesn't matter.
Sure.
If it's a black guy, then they'll put you in the ghetto. So that's, again, This is the thing that.
So we need to incorporate and then hire a white guy to go do our bank loan interviews.
I mean, have you not heard about? This is what African companies have to do, man.
Yeah, no, I know.
Yeah, like it's a thing. It's a whole thing.
And
it's
I can't speak Chinese, so I can't go to.
I mean, Chinese did it too. Like, there's a
course.
whole, the white man for the face of the company as a position where he doesn't actually do anything except be the face of the company.
Iron Man 3, the Mandarin. He just sat around and drank.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although we're going to get a Mandarin story.
Yeah.
Like,
which is awesome.
Where the Mandarin is like the actual focus of the story.
Actual 10 rings.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm glad they doubled back on. Well, and that was the focus from the very beginning. So
yeah.
I think that was a good head fake to show that they're definitely not as
Is Ben Kingsley gonna do the Mandarin again, or are they gonna get somebody better?
Oh, there's no way they're gonna Ben Kingsley. Like in the Simu Liu era, there's no way you can get a non-Asian Mandarin.
No, I know, that's what I mean. It's like, are they gonna try and make Ben Kingsley? Well,
no.
They had him portray Gandhi, so it fucking ScarJo.
I imagine they'll probably make Mandarin Shang-Chi's father.
Oh, that would make sense.
So then they have an actual interesting antagonist,
or his uncle or something,
or his uncle. Yeah, they're probably gonna be.
If they go uncle, then
somehow.
they can pull a Lion King on us all.
Right. Yeah.
Because if we can get the Lion King and the Mandarin at the same time, that'll fuck up like multiple generations of viewers like instantly.
Yeah. And well, they'll make them care about Shang-Chi more.
Yeah. You guys at Disney, if you haven't already started that, you can have that one.
Yeah, I think that'll be an interesting.
Holy crap! I saw a Blade poster, and it wasn't Wesley Snipes.
Yeah, it's Mahershala Ali.
Yeah. And he looked like a. They got the eyes to be just as like fierce and like holy shit, that guy's not human.
Well, did you see him on Luke Cage?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah,
he's an awesome actor.
But what I liked is that it inspired. At first, I thought it was Wesley Snipes, and I had to look at him closer. Like, that's not Wesley Snipes.
That's funny.
But the eyes are like the same.
Yeah.
And they got the whole like the lighting is just it screams Blade. Mm-hmm. And I'm just really excited about that.
Yeah.
We need somebody to represent. We need a character in MCU to represent. The absolutely vicious and single-minded, I guess Blade is like a long-term revenge story, but until they get Wolverine and they can't, he's the champion of blood at this point, of bloody encounters.
Yeah.
And until we get a real Wolverine
it's funny you say that because I think that's where they might bring Wolverine in through Blade as well. Well, not through Blade, but with Blade.
Yeah.
Like, there's a big fight between them in the comics, so they might have something in the movies that.
Well, that's like a long-standing rivalry, though.
Yeah.
So that'll be interesting to explore.
But it's like a friendly rivalry in that they
have to work together.
Respect each other because they can both beat the shit out of each other.
They're the only person they are the only other person that they can fight without truly go full steam with against, because that's just the case. I'm pretty sure at some point Wolverine has the Infinity Gauntlet.
Yeah, he does.
So he's clearly one of the baddest dudes in existence. You kind of have to be like one of the baddest people in existence to wield the gauntlet. Mm-hmm. At some point, one of the Black Panthers has the gauntlet even. Mm. I remember seeing this old clipping of Black Panther, and he's like apologizing to Namor. He's like, "I'm sorry, Namor. I have to do what I have to do," or something like that.
Well, I think over time they're gonna go through every plot and subplot that could ever possibly exist.
It's the Infinity War. It all culminates in this one moment in time. That's the thing that's gonna be really difficult to represent. Is that the fight is truly over this one point when. And the version of it that we've seen thus far with Thanos and the Avengers, they don't even get to that point. Thanos and Adam Warlock haven't
Adam Warlock isn't even emerged.
He's not even
yet.
emerged yet, yeah. And they haven't gone up against the Living Tribunal. I mean, Adam Warlock becomes the next tribunal.
We know the tribunal exists.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Thanos hasn't destroyed the tribunal. So
well, but this is also where the Eternals movie hasn't come out yet. So
also, yeah.
This is kind of where they're probably going to tie all that shit in there, and we actually get to see the tribunal at scale.
We're gonna be looking at their feet.
Mm-hmm.
There's gonna be a giant toe, and it'll be the size of the Hulk, like as tall as the Hulk. And the Hulk will be like, that's a big toe.
I think they're gonna. I mean, they have to do some of the stuff at scale.
Yeah.
At first, so we get it. You know, otherwise it'll be useless to have these cosmic beings.
They'll show outer space. It'll be talking and be like, what the hell? It's like, oh, that's Quasar.
Yeah. Well, I think that's also where the Dormammu.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so hard to take in all that information at first, but then when you see how much information is in there, and you're able to just pause it and look at how much, you know, what a living universe basically looks like, you see the scale of things in that.
Oh, that would be a good grudge match, Dormammu versus Quasar. I mean, when universes collide, like that would be a really cool fight. How does that? What would that even look like?
Yeah, that's kind of where I think they do have to do something like that at scale.
Yeah.
So we understand. This is like galactic creation if they're fighting basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, I imagine planets will be spinning off and
exploding, crushing, decomposing.
Black holes will be created and.
Oh, so have you read about the potential for Planet 9 not being a planet but a primordial black hole?
Yeah.
So it occurred to me that what if the strange orbit that they say is the orbit of Planet 9, if it's a black hole, what if it's our solar system that actually orbits it like that?
Right.
And then all these crazy, trans-Neptunian objects that have even more psychotic, non-planar orbits, those are the result of being wielded around this primordial black hole. What if we were wrong the whole time and that the sun's binary counterpart is, in fact, the black hole? And it's
that's very possible.
And it's not swinging around us.
Yeah, I think it's really possible, but that's the issue of reframing how we look at things in, relative to each other. In that,
what if all of the kinetic energy stored within the planets circling our sun is actually the result of spinning around the basin of a black hole?
Yeah, it's very possible, and also it's moving.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think we're learning more and more about what expansion of space, while also living in that space,
actually
means about velocity and motion, and just because we can't perceive it, even in our capacity to measure other things, it's only when we start measuring other things from static points that we start to see that parallax happen and start to understand that parts of the universe aren't moving at the same speed as other parts.
But we can't even create a static point because it's subject to
moving. And that's the issue. Is it gets back to the paradox of how do you create a static point in something that's moving?
You'd have to have create so much energy to get to a point where it's neutral against the relative launch point.
But this is where you have things that are in the Lagrangian points, and they're all already between orbits of other bodies, and then you start to say, oh, this is still moving relative to these other bodies, and that's why you just get a background radiation or general background velocity that becomes the baseline.
What is it, Lagrangian 5 or whatever, the one that's beyond the moon? There's one that's in front of the moon, and then there's the triangle way off beyond it where there's it's the Earth's other orbiting body. It's basically a cloud of rocks that never fully coalesced. And occasionally stuff gets knocked out of place and it zooms by the planet, but it's so far out that it's not really a concern.
Mm-hmm.
We would have to fly into it, and even then the debris field is sufficiently large and the objects are sufficiently small that we wouldn't see anything until it tore holes in our spaceship.
Yeah.
Or knocked off a chunk of it. Landing gear or something stupid.
I'm fairly positive we're pretty far. It seems like
there's a lot more space between us and the closest object than we realize.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
The closest,
Exactly.
the closest objects are still like.
The only
way
reason
far
we're
away.
here is because it's been that way for a very long time.
Yeah.
And I think we're over.
Like all the shit that would have hit us has already either hit us or missed us at this point.
We're in the later stages of debris existence in the grand scale of the universe.
Yeah,
I'm sure there was a much more debris-filled universe that was much more concentrated in certain areas where the gravity was higher.
Man, I imagine it's so much more chaotic.
Yeah, oh god, yeah.
Like,
you know, I always try to imagine that first like instant in the sense of like how much mass, like obviously it's really unfathomable, but trying to imagine that much mass is just fucking insane in the sense of all of that trying to find a place to go and expanding is, you know, it's just amazing.
And the expansion is so fast that it forms new compounds.
Just white. I mean, you know, just there's so much fucking energy. It's just so bright. Like it's just one gigantic fucking. Everything is white all of a sudden.
And that's just within the visible spectrum.
Right. Yeah.
Everything else is also like completely beyond comprehension.
Exactly. I have to comprehend it from my visible spectrum.
Yeah.
And I don't really have the capacity to do anything else. And that you know gets to this limitation of, you know, all that dark energy was there too, but it, you know, wasn't perceptible. If anything, that's what caused it, is all that dark energy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it gets back to this weird...
That stuff probably is activated by some kind of emission from, you know...
What became the catalyst? And that's what always gets me is, like, what was the piece of mass that tripped the tipping point? Like,
what was the straw that broke the camel's back,
right,
that initiated the process of...
If that is so in fact the way that it goes, like, what happened? And I think this is where, you know, people want to insert a grand initiator or an actor into that process, but that's not necessarily how potential to kinetic energy conversion works. There is a lot of time potential energy buildup that tips.
The dark matter
just builds up.
It just builds up and it becomes heavy enough that it collapses into a dark black hole. And then it.
I mean, it's a black hole because it
already is a black hole. So it coalesces into a large enough body of mass that it can't even support itself, so it actually collapses on itself and turns itself into its own form of nova,
right? And
releases energy, and in the process creates galaxies, and is such a violent reaction that it expands out from whatever tiny space it was to the space of multiple galaxies.
I mean, it effectively blew itself inside out.
Yeah.
As a fabric.
You know, I had this thought about traveling at warp speed. It's a nice idea that folding space and like condensing it kind of like an accordion, but stars have their own mass and they affect the fabric of space-time.
Yep.
So
that notion it loses.
Yeah, once you have to get close to, once you travel,
have to have so much energy. It just falls apart.
But not
real
just
quick.
that, but the space between things has to be clear. Otherwise, you condense.
That's what I mean. It would take so much energy. Like you're saying, if you're folding space, you're folding both sides and everything in between, and making sure that they connect. So it takes so much energy.
There's like that. Anytime you have to go even relatively close to anything massive, even a small star, it would take exponentially more energy to fold that region of space because it's already stretched or pulled in some other way.
But I think part of it also it was finding these corridors that are already pre-existing because of them like falling into place in the universe, and that they were predicted because of the mass that would happen. They would happen in unpredictable places.
Like whenever Spock took the Enterprise, when he took that bird of prey too close to the sun, they went back to the 1980s. Mm-hmm. I mean, so you can't fly too close to a star because it'll send you back in time or forward in time, depending on the way you calculate it.
Right.
And so you flew next to a black hole, too close to a black hole, it might spit you out.
You have to fly fast enough, though.
Yeah.
That's part of it. Is
well,
like,
that's part of the calculation.
Right. So if you know, I think this is where
time warp.
Yeah. The whole issue is they only have enough actual powers because the star is contributing to that equation, and it's not just coming from their ship.
Yeah.
So it's only if you're flying around the orbit of something of like a star that you would be able to execute a maneuver like that in this physical realm. But this is why when they do it on the TV show, it works out. But in that, it still neglects a lot of what you're saying in the sense of there's so much matter and there's so much gravity and
They've
mass.
got to move. They've got to move all that shit.
Right, but it becomes a ridiculous notion. It just becomes an absurd notion.
Like, if there's enough energy to create a warp conduit, a warp factor 10 conduit,
but this, I mean,
that's a lot of energy.
But
Holy
this also,
shit.
I think,
and especially sustain it for like, sometimes Enterprise D would be at warp factor 10 for like several hours or days even.
But I think this is also our limitation of moving forward in time, not allowing us to say like, if there's some channel through which matter can flow that is not forward or backwards and is allowed to move through that, it's like. There is
maybe the dilithium
antimatter
antimatter reaction is actually way more efficient than I understand it to be.
Well, what I'm saying is there's a path of least resistance through time.
Yeah.
And it's not just through matter, it's through time itself. And then if you can have a fold that happens along that path of least resistance, it takes the least amount of energy, but also is the most possible, because then in those places all the matter is moving it's like if it only happens when the planets are aligned and all 7 planets are, you have these myths about planets being in line.
Yeah, well, maybe that's like a gravitational telescope.
Exactly. That's what I'm getting at, in the sense of there may be these myths because there's some basis in reality of if there is 9 planets in a line, maybe it is easier for a time traveler to come through.
Or maybe that's the only way the solar sail can get you from Earth to the Jupiter colony.
So check it out. It makes more sense
or in the Saturn colony.
So, okay, let's say what I think might be the issue is you need to go when there's the least amount of matter in your way so that you don't collide with it. So in doing that, if you can calculate this specific trajectory where things are in line, and it only happens every 26,000 years. If you can go to that spot, then there's the least amount of possibility that anything is in that path where you're calculating that gets, like, you can calculate around
there might
the
be
orbits in that.
Streams of neutrinos that we're completely unaware of that can only be harnessed with a solar sail created out of material that we have yet to produce or even invent the process to derive the material.
Mm-hmm.
But once we have that material, we can ride on neutrino streams that allow us to travel faster than light, because those are actually tied to some kind of subspace
and it'll also allow us to travel through matter, and potentially, if we can figure out how to modulate our frequency in line with the neutrinos, which pass through matter. So that's where, again, it's like the neutrino sail ship might just function on a whole different
we might not even need energy in the sense that we are familiar with it today by that point.
Yeah, and this is where there comes this element of when we start to think outside of our means in the best way possible. Because
there are like way more neutrinos out floating around space than we realize. Like it's like one of those things that it barely gets discussed in science fiction.
Constantly bombarded by neutrinos. Constantly, and that's why I've always thought, once we get to neutrino collision detection or collision exploitation, harvesting. Yeah, we're neutrino farms are gonna be the way to go versus solar farms.
Terrestrial neutrino farms versus orbiting neutrino farms.
I mean, both. In that, if you have an orbiting neutrino farm, then you'll have a neutrino
redirection system.
Exactly. So then you can start, we can start filtering all that shit from everywhere rather than trying to say only get photons from the sun and get hydrogen. I
still look forward to the day that we have like orbital gas harvesting operations in Venus.
Mm-hmm.
Because once we can do that on Venus, then we can probably send something like that to the big gas-covered planets,
Right.
the ones with huge storms.
Yeah.
Because I think now I can't remember what it was. I'm pretty sure that there's one of like I think it's Neptune's moons has such high atmospheric pressure that it rains like diamonds or something like that. It's one of the moons out there has such huge pressure exerted on it that it just rains diamonds. And not that I think that diamonds are valuable in the traditional monetary sense, but more in the sense that if there's a stable supply of diamonds, that's like a boon for communications.
Right.
Because we're essentially we're approaching an era of like crystalline computing with using optics and like the built-in I don't know the properties of crystals that we can create superconductive circuits now.
Well, yeah, I think the first thing that will be able to go FTL is information.
Mm-hmm.
Like the notion of a human being sent forward or backward in time before
an idea,
or like an SMS or something. It's just absurd. Cause
we'll have nearly instantaneous communication across. Like interstellar communication with like intragalactic communication before we'll have faster than light human travel. But
long before.
But to be able to communicate with someone in Andromeda and be like, "Hey guys, glad you guys made it."
And I think effectively, once you master one, then mastering the other starts to become more accessible in the sense of like, then we'll start to make it so that we can travel near, I wouldn't even know necessarily near light speed without breaking down ourselves. There's going to be something that has to happen where we are able to do these things without destroying our bodies completely. Because it's like our bodies break down at 8 or 9 Gs, let alone, the inertial dampener gets laughed at, but that's the whole thing that's making these fantasies possible. Otherwise, people would just become fucking soup on the fucking wall of the ship pretty much immediately. And that's real.
Even with a slow acceleration.
In that
we're talking like decades long acceleration,
well,
not to kill people.
The pull on their they wouldn't be able to keep up with the G-forces that would start to be generated.
You'd have to the ship would have to be oriented like a skyscraper in terms of what everyone was doing because of the acceleration. And then once it reached speed, all systems would have to rotate down.
Right. Yeah, it would have to be in constant rotation and couldn't be oriented towards its direction in space to actually make it so that people's eventual
organ failure.
Yeah.
So we got to be in a liquid. We have to be in a liquid solution so we don't get crushed by our own.
Or, like I was saying earlier, we have to have it so that somehow
inertial dampers have to be discovered.
Our phase is modulated so that we're not fit in matter form. Like if we, aren't moving, we're not actually moving through space.
Well, I think
then we don't get the same effects on our body.
Surely there's a way to utilize some kind of electromagnetic field to function as a buffer of acceleration.
Yeah.
And we just got to figure out what.
But that's phase modification basically. That's what I'm saying is like, it would effectively be making a bubble of
electromagnetic stability of sorts.
A new gravity. That's modified for the specific.
You guys can have that one too. It's called New Gravity.
Oh man.
No, I think these are important. This is important stuff to consider because with all of the concern over our planet, I was watching Auto-Tune the News. Remember that from like a decade ago? Well, they had one song. It was on Very Thin Ice with Katie Couric, and they revisit it 10 years later. And basically everything, all the concerns that were echoed in that song, in the Auto-Tune song, happened.
Yeah.
Like before the 10-year mark. And so here he is now, the guy that did all that stuff. He does a new version of it where he adds like the update. He's like talking about how he didn't realize what this would become. didn't realize that all that shit was gonna be true.
Yeah.
Like all these things, and it's still funny, and it's still like auto-tune the news, and it's haha, look at those guys be foolish
But
idiots.
the commentary's different.
But now it's like guys, it happened. Everything they said would happen happened. This isn't like, conjecture. This shit happened. For real happened.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still happening. And it's getting worse. And then so the news is all like, 16-year-old girl sails a boat.
Right.
And everyone's paying attention to her. And then nobody cares about the 16-year-old guy who created the automated plastic recycling system that's finally
collecting this shit.
It's finally working.
Yeah.
It swims around, powered by the ocean currents, and collects trash. And why this isn't getting any coverage? Like, although I had to go look for it.
Yeah. I guess I'm of the mind there's no way that 16-year-old was the first one to come up with that idea.
Of course not.
And that's kind of where...
I'm pretty sure that Kevin Costner already presented one like a decade or so ago.
After we made Waterworld?
Yeah, seriously, because...
He's like, we got to save these oceans. I made a whole movie about it.
It's like, look, these oceans will be way clean by the time this story takes place. We got to clean this shit up.
Yeah.
Release the Leviathan.
Nobody wanted to watch that movie.
Yeah, well, nobody wanted to take him seriously when he showed him his oil extraction system that used ocean currents to power itself to extract oil from when Deepwater Horizon happened. He's like, I've got a fully developed system. I've got 300 units. I'm ready to deploy. And the government's like, oh, we don't know. We're gonna twiddle our thumbs some more. And he's like, guys, I'm telling you this works. Here, let me show you. Here, I'll mix some water and some oil and pump it into the thing, and then it separated them, completely separated them. They're like, well, we don't know. God damn it. They just didn't like the idea of being saved by Kevin Costner.
Yeah,
that's really what
after he made Waterworld.
After he made Waterworld.
Yeah. Fuck, man, Kevin, if you're out there,
dude, I'm taking my hat off right
Randos, now. Do it. Do it.
Just save us. Just
save us, Kevin.
Seriously. We're not laughing at you. We're laughing at the absurdity of all this. Mm-hmm. We actually think what you're doing is awesome.
Yeah. No, for sure. I just think it's fucked up that he tried to warn us. That whole Waterworld movie was like a big ass warning.
It was. It was like, it's like, do you guys want Mad Max on jet skis? Because that's what you're gonna get.
Yeah. Kevin Costner was doing it way before Greta, and nobody listened to him.
And he had a huge platform.
Yeah.
And nobody listened.
Yep. So that's kind of where I'm like, this whole thing of getting back to creating these heroes to then tear them down, that's where it is I don't think Kevin Costner's name ever got dragged through the mud or anything bad. It's just a matter of he wasn't taken seriously.
Yeah, I just think they ignored him.
Yeah.
And he was right.
Yeah, he was totally right.
Ugh.
Yeah.
He didn't need to be a scientist to be right. He engineered a freaking oil separator that works.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty insane.
I don't even think he was asking for money from it. He just wanted to show everyone that it worked. It was like one of those things like, TIG Productions is self-sustained. I don't actually need... I already have all the boats to deploy. Just let me know where to go, guys. It's like, motherfuckers. There was a video of it showing it working, too. That was the thing. And it...
Well, like you were pointing out, oil and water want to separate naturally anyway.
That's true.
So... the idea of oil spilling out into the ocean and not being able to be collected, that's just a matter of people being dumb about it.
Yeah, I know, right?
It's moving too fast. No, it's not.
We just need to collect it all and put it in a stable environment, and it will separate us, and then we can siphon it up off the top and inject the water.
But then they want to act like this shit isn't basic fucking chemistry.
The worst part, of course, isn't that they dilly-dallied and twiddled their thumbs. It's that they used a chemical dispersant.
Corrects it.
That allowed the oil to turn into even smaller little beads and become harder to collect.
And then the fish were eating it.
And the fish ate it. And now a bunch of people in the South Coast all have cancer.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's also foreshadowed by the other oil spill that happened around the exact same time as Deepwater Horizon, but it wasn't with a company that had any ties to the United States, so they just kind of let it bleed, and it's been bleeding ever since.
Mm. Yeah.
And there are big swaths of the Caribbean that are dead, but we don't know about that stuff because those aren't popular tourist areas that get a lot of attention.
Well, I think American tourism is a killer, and I'm glad it's coming to an end in a way, in the sense of it's going to have to reform itself.
Yeah,
Because Americans like love traveling to places that quote unquote feel safe, and then letting the tourism die in other places, and those other places decline because they're not getting visited. Everybody loved going to Mexico every fucking spring break for a long time, but then once the
fear of the cartels.
the fear of the cartels took over the media, then that went out, and then they started going to Dominican Republic.
Guys, the
Dominican
cartels
Republic
aren't trying
fear.
to kill you. They want you to buy their weed and their meth. Seriously. They want you to
Right.
go visit. They want you to
Basically.
go to Mommy and Poppy's taco stand, because
Yeah.
then you're going to get really hungry and go buy some Coke from Jose down the street. And then once that starts getting a little too much to handle, they expect you to go back out there and buy some of their weed.
Yeah.
It's a vicious cycle, but that's how people actually have fun in Mexico. I mean, this is obviously a joke, but
Yeah.
because there are plenty of things to do in Mexico other than
Read
drugs.
Jack Kerouac.
Read Jack.
On the road. That's all that's about.
I
That's
know,
all that's
I
about.
know.
And he was a fucking famed writer.
Everyone
All he
wants
did
to-
was go on the road and get fucked up, and then we're not supposed to act like that's not what he did. I mean, and then be like,
And have
oh,
a-
this.
Well, they also don't want to acknowledge that he and James Dean had a thing too.
Right, yeah,
Like-
yeah, exactly. Our most prolific American man was heterosexual. There's nothing in his past that was homosexual.
That Porsche was not a way to get Jack alone.
Yeah, fucking Marlon Brando never slept with a man either. Only women. What's the American
Only
way?
beautiful, big-breasted women.
Well, that's the funny shit. Like, I saw somebody had made. I feel like it now in retrospect, it was probably Russian, but somebody made a meme about what it was to be a real American man, and they had like Tom Hardy, fucking dressed up as a cowboy, and I'm like, first off, he's British.
Yeah.
Second off, he's openly bisexual, because the meme was about something how you like only fuck women. I mean, it didn't say fuck, but it was like
Only sleeps with
only
beautiful
only have solid missionary heterosexual sex. None of that funny stuff.
Oh man.
You only go to first through fourth home base. You don't go to fifth base. And that's like, it was. And like I
Never
said,
go to
in
fifth
retrospect,
base.
I bet it was fucking Russian.
Yeah.
Trying to fuck with the dumb hicks that didn't realize that Tom
man.
Hardy's not American. Just because they have him wearing cowboy shit.
Oh,
It's just like
man.
Tom Hardy or fucking Tom Holland as like the quintessential Bronx guys is fucking British.
You know, with the amount of time that he spent on like just in clips promoting Avengers or whatever, you think people would know.
Realize, yeah.
He doesn't even have a good Bronx accent.
No.
It's
No.
like not even a New York accent.
It's like nondescript American.
Yeah.
Which British are really good at, but they're not good necessarily. Like, they can go Southern really easily, because Southern's kind of an easy one, but
Well, I think that's a reflection of American music.
yeah.
Is that a lot of regional accents make it into very idiosyncratic music styles.
But at the same time, it's really hard to sing with certain accents.
That's
like, you
true.
can't sing with a British accent.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
which
I
is
think a
why.
British singing accent sounds like a person singing Broadway.
I mean, and that's, again, that like, go back to, like, the Rolling Stones or Beatles.
Well,
like,
those guys, the Rolling Stones wanted to sound like Muddy Waters.
I mean, but it's, again,
Yeah.
you can't really, like, fucking, what's the name, Harry Shearer.
Yeah.
You can't really do it. It's like super hard to sing because of the way you have to vocalize. It requires like an open jaw,
Yeah.
and that's not really like the clenched jaw is kind of where a lot of the British and they like lengthen their jaw rather than open,
Yeah.
whereas singing demands open. So, like Adele doesn't sound British when
No.
she sings.
Well, she sounds like a studio queen from Detroit. That to me.
I mean,
She sounds like she
basically,
like her voice sounds
but
like it belongs
this
within
is what happens
in
when
the
you
wall
have
of
a big
sound.
voice. Like,
Yeah.
it makes your diction a certain way,
Yeah.
in the same way that like Celine Dion when she sings,
Well, she actually sounds Canadian.
not really.
I'm just kidding.
You know what I mean? Like,
No, she does have a kind of a. There's this. I don't want to say je ne sais quoi, but there actually is. Like, there's something about her voice that is not entirely
she sings
English.
falsetto sometimes,
I know. Yeah,
and that's
true.
where when she sings falsetto, you can do better diction. So it's the same shit with Mariah Carey. When Mariah Carey sings her falsetto, then it's like.
But Mariah Carey, like,
There's.
I have a so what was it? It was when I was in the 7th or 8th grade. She released. I can't remember the name of the album. It was like. Had a lot of songs that were on the radio, and the
Was it
one.
Butterfly?
Yeah, I think so. That thing.
The one with the old dirty bastard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When that thing came out, like everything, all the media before was showing her like church friendly, and then that comes out and it starts to become more poppy and it starts to take on more of a mainstream look and it starts to look less wholesome and more like.
Well, because she was married to Tommy Mottola, so she had him dictating her image, and then when they divorced, that's when she started doing the more hip hop shit.
Yeah.
It's like documented. I didn't make that shit up.
Yeah.
Like, he was 100% controlling her image.
From whenever her image shift starts to occur, there's a very distinct churchy gospel sound that almost completely vanishes, like afterwards. Yeah. And what's interesting about that is the part that vanishes is pretty much all low register. Like all the high stuff. I think there's a point with singers where once they get into a certain range, it can't help but sound a certain way because of the techniques that are required to even get there. Yeah. And so it's like.
Well, people didn't know for a long time if she was black or not, because.
Really?
Yeah, because same shit with Pink, they were like playing into it, and trying to like tone them so it was like okay, this is when like. Appropriation of black singing culture starts to happen in that they start to make it so that when Mariah Carey first came out, they would like do the video tinting so that you couldn't really tell if she was mixed race or if she was full on white. Same shit with Pink. Her first video was in black and white.
Yeah, but then she did that video.
Her hair was pink
with the motorcycle, and it was
But
in
you
full
still
color.
couldn't really tell. You still couldn't really
That's
tell.
because she has a big old butt, or did at the time.
I mean, and they played it up.
They did.
I bet that shit wasn't even real. Like, I bet it was very
padded
much.
Booty.
Yeah. Very much so.
Because that's true. Because what was it? She was on that the Moulin Rouge video. Like, she didn't have the big old butt in that video.
Nope.
And she definitely, there was no question at that point, but.
I'm gonna use the bathroom.
That's one of those things that I've always found really interesting about pop culture is that so much of the look is tied to the time. Like, it really is, it's all built into whatever's happening right now. So when we look around ourselves, like, a lot of the time our personal space is a reflection of the transitions through time, because we have things that take us back to, like, when you first set up a room, to the thing that you just added to the ambience. But with pop culture, it's all about the surface, and so because it's ever changing, we're faced with all of these new rules. It's a variation of keeping up with the Joneses in a lot of ways. We have a new phone every year. We get new electronics get introduced all the time. Got to keep up with changes to your operating system, to your mobile device, otherwise you might not be able to use your software. And at a point I get really tired of it, because I don't want to change software all the time. I don't want to have to relearn where a setting is. I don't want to have to go into the audio settings for my Facebook app and tell it that it shouldn't be making sounds at me. But and this is part of the contract, I guess. You have to go in every time and turn off the system sounds. You have to update your software and hardware all the time so that you can check on your social profiles. You have to do all these things, and that's where we are now. We're at this really strange place that's identified by constant updates and constantly being forced to keep up with updates. And for the longest time, pop culture wasn't like that. It moved a little bit more slowly, and it allowed for things to breathe. But everything now is just it's like a rainstorm.
Well, I think it felt like it did if you were in the know, but if you like didn't make it to opening weekend, then your shit got spoiled because people would talk about it. Like that's what people did was like, oh, if there's a movie release, they talk about it, and that's all they did for the next week. All the things that happened.
Yeah, that's like the first 2 weeks of school.
It is, and that's how culture worked. Culture was like a big high school.
It was slower. It had a different pace.
Oh, for sure. But what I'm getting at is in that the pace created this thing where you had to be in on the thing for the week or else you were out of the loop.
Yeah.
And it happened every week. There was like a weekly cycle of things that.
And if you were part of the tastemaker, the group of tastemakers.
Right. Do you remember like the Budweiser Was Up commercials?
Yeah.
Like everybody was doing that shit
God, I hated
immediately.
that shit.
But then part of it was like, it was an inside joke for half of America for 2 weeks, and then the other half caught up, and then was like, oh, this is what those people. And then it creates a meta joke for next year. So these types of like tastemaker, like, okay, this gets back to a full thing of when we were talking about if Lil Nas X was an industry plant or not. So now that he's starting to he's taking a break from music.
He just got started.
So yeah, what I'm getting at is there is a window of exploitation on these things that these companies have, and I believe he's very much aware of this, and that he's like playing it the best possible way one could. In that, you remember the Cali Swag Project or whatever district, the Teach Me How to Dougie people?
Oh yeah, yeah.
You don't know where the fuck they are now.
I don't think they were that. Well, I guess they were pretty important for
like
15
a week.
Minutes.
Yeah. And that's where there is this element of that shit happens every summer. There's always one song at least that happens. So if you can figure out a way to manipulate that and make it so everybody thinks that this song is the Old Town Road, you got kids singing Old Town Road, you got the Avengers singing Old Town Road, then everybody thinks, oh, this is the song of the summer, so I guess I'll play this every day.
It's funny you say that. I remember there's this list of songs that are guaranteed to make white people get turned. It has songs like "Don't Stop Believin'" and "Come Sail Away," and all these like
Bruce Springsteen
classic stuff, right? Someone was like,
Guns N' Roses.
Yeah, this person insisted that "Old Town Road" and some Miley Cyrus song are now a part of this list.
Of course, but for kids.
For kids,
not for old white people.
No, I know. Bro,
have you seen the videos of the kids? Kids lose their shit when Old Town, like white kids, fucking black kids,
everyone.
Mexicans, Chinese, all these little kids, they'll lose they know all the words. And that's where I'm like, there's a sense of that generation when they have their what I guess 2019 throwback nights is gonna be Old Town Road in the same way it's fucking Juvenile and the Hot Boys and fucking Back That Ass Up for Us and the Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre.
Yeah, no, I get that. No, but it's funny because like I'm watching this thread develop, and this person's like, yeah, and also add this song and add this song too. And it's like there's this like decade of music that's happening right now. That's happening right now with songs that are being fed to a different portion of the music listening audience. Like, I don't get any of this stuff because I'm very dialed into like drum and bass and jungle right now. And sometimes I listen to like more atmospheric ambient music.
So here's my thing though.
But I'm not listening to mainstream music that much.
I walk a lot. And for a couple of weeks, you couldn't walk anywhere without hearing Old Town Road, and it was all like pickup trucks.
Mm-hmm.
It was the Billy Ray Cyrus version though, so that's where again they snuck Lil Nas X in with Billy Ray Cyrus, and that's how the whole thing was him getting over, like him getting rejected by the country billboards for being black was what got black people to support him. Then putting Billy Ray Cyrus on the remix to make it country music is what got white people to support him. And then there was white people who didn't like the fact that they were holding him off.
So I saw this interview with Billy Ray Cyrus talking about how he was really excited to be part of that whole project, and he said he went in there with his own ideas, and wanted to include a line about smoking weed, and one of the label representatives heard it. It was like, no, you can't do this. And I was like, well, why not? He's like, well, for one, you're Billy Ray Cyrus, and two, this has to be friendly, radio friendly. He's like, well, why can't we have two versions of it? It's like, no, it's not how this works. So
but now they got like 6 versions.
I know, not just 6, but like they've got 6 country versions, and then they've got the electronic remixes, and then they've got the rap remixes, and then they've got like the the karaoke versionettes, and it's like, oh my god.
But this is what I'm getting at. This is like
the trap and feature-based versions are actually quite dope.
I'm sure they are. The original version's dope. But this is like peak studio music exploitation. In that him retiring to me confirms he was industry playing all along, and I'm glad he did it, because then it allows that whole process, like the fact that a gay black dude did it. It's like super democratized now. Yeah. But in that, this gets back to the gay mafia shit. Mm-hmm. This is the whole thing of like, do black guys have to become gay to like make it in America?
Do they have to hide behind
now?
A white face to get it?
Is that part of it? And this reinforces all of that narrative. So that's kind of where, on the one hand, I'm fucking glad for the dude, but then on the other hand, it reinforces all the shit Dave Chappelle and fucking
this is
other people have been saying.
I'm gonna call this a white culture thing, because I've only really heard it from like my dad or my uncles, or basically the white half of my family. Is that all you need is one song? You know why they call them one-hit wonders? Because that one hit is enough to sustain them if they're smart. And you can have a complete, like, independently wealthy life with one good one-hit wonder style song.
No doubt. I mean,
Nas X probably has enough money to retire several times over if he
there's no doubt about that.
And so maybe there is a financial responsibility aspect to it that isn't present, because the culture doesn't want to talk about the financial responsibility. They want to talk about landing.
Right.
And so,
I mean, but what your dad's also talking about is somebody who had financial education before they got rich, and that's almost never the case.
But Little Nas X, though, might have had the benefit of being exposed to that kind of situation.
He didn't, though. He didn't? He had $5 in his bank account before he blew up. Wow. And he was living on his sister's couch.
Wow.
But he's also a kid.
Yeah.
So I think he had the benefit of understanding that it's temporary, so he's not blowing it all in a way that I don't think he's going to be like poor, broken, homeless.
He's not going to be MC Hammer.
I mean, Hammer figures shit out again, but this is where...
Yeah, but it took him a third round.
Not really. I mean, this is... Okay, that whole MC Hammer thing is interesting in that... So, like, before he... Like, the whole reason he went broke is because he over-leveraged his assets and his spending against his returns in a way that caught up to him, that put him into debt in a media cycle that was predisposed to try to ridicule black males.
Yeah.
Like, at the same fucking time, there's any white male celebrities probably going through the same shit, if not worse. And then there's white rich dudes who are going through the same shit that we're just not getting told about. Mm-hmm. But because MC Hammer was in the limelight, his whole shit got made into a fucking
cautionary tale.
But then he profited off of it. Yeah. So he was making money off of selling his story to VH1 that put him in a spot where he's not that bad off. He's like one of the first people that started doing reality TV. He was doing commercials. So
he's definitely got a comeback story, but there's...
But then what I guess
the Hammer Time Ranch thing, that was like pretty damning, I think.
But it was all fake in the first... What I'm getting at is you have all these people who are leveraging credit to create this lifestyle, the MTV Cribs lifestyle, that wasn't sustainable in the first place. Yeah. So MC Hammer was just the one that we learned about first. So then we associated, like, how many...
I mean, that's the point of the cautionary tale, though. The example of the cautionary tale is that they emerged to say, hey, don't do this.
Right, but I guess
I mean, I understand what you're saying, that there's an industry that
you
sits
remember
in
the
place to
Theranos
benefit from
Elizabeth Holmes chick?
Oh, yeah.
So, like, you remember her. Everybody else will still remember MC Hammer as more of a cautionary tale, even though...
Yeah, but Theranos is, like, a huge cautionary tale within the tech sector.
How many people fucking know that shit, though?
I think you have to work in the tech sector to be even aware that thing happened.
Exactly. So, because of the way that... Like, when she was popping and Elizabeth Holmes was the new Steve Jobs...
Yeah.
Like, that shit was all over the covers, all over the fucking Time magazines, Esquires. She was the hot new thing, Vogue, whatever. She's there, but when she becomes a cautionary tale, sweep that shit under the rug. Let's fucking talk about Cat Williams or Dave Chappelle. Like, it all of a sudden, like, the downside of the Elizabeth Holmes cautionary tale is not a cautionary tale. It's fucking hidden. It's, like, swept under the rug in a way where we're like... People have just forgot that shit even happened.
Yeah. Well, I think it's obvious that you can't just materialize a Steve Jobs.
They can try.
I mean, as much as as much as they want to try, you can't just materialize a Steve Jobs.
I mean, but then how much of that is fake? Because this is why, like, okay.
Because Steve needs Steve Wozniak, and they also need that silent third party.
We also need an exorbitant profit margin. Also, where the products are being produced at the lowest possible cost,
priced beyond
in a place
the reach.
where they're committing suicide at the factories because they're being overworked. Only in that scenario can Steve Jobs actually exist.
Yeah.
And then we get the fucking Foxconn hidden from us, and it becomes a thing. Like, I think it was only 2014 when people found out about Foxconn, right? I don't think it was like... Because the iPhone was originally released, first released in 2007.
So, being myself and having taken apart every computer I've ever had, I was aware of Foxconn as an entity that manufactured motherboards for Apple and various.
I'm talking
PC
about the
vendors.
suicide nets.
No, I'm just talking about like my awareness of Foxconn.
Yeah.
So I was aware of this company called Foxconn since I was like 7 or not even that, like my teenage years, I think is when I first remember seeing the word Foxconn on a motherboard. And they generally made really good products. Their products were actually some of the best motherboards that you could find. And lo and behold, it's because they are they're the manufacturer of motherboards for Apple, and they're the most demanding client imaginable. And so when I started reading about how the working conditions at Foxconn factories were leading to... Actually, it's interesting. The Foxconn debacle essentially initiated a complete revolution of Chinese working conditions, factory working conditions.
Nobody knew about
because
this
nobody knew about it. They didn't.
Foxconn's not even the worst.
No, they're not.
It's not even remotely the worst.
No, they're actually pretty much. Like,
they're pretty good on
side.
Because I've seen the documentaries where they show like.
But there's a complete and like almost overnight change in the factory culture, living culture around factories in China. And I'm not talking about there's a factory down the road. I'm talking about down the road there's an entire city that's dedicated to supporting one factory and its output.
Right. And the people live in these little hostels that are like upon each other where they get no private space. They have to share fucking...
But now, at least the good ones, they've got these apartment complexes, and the further up the chain you work, the better housing you get and the better access to resources you get. And so there's this weird process that has come as a result of the exposure to the conditions at Foxconn.
Yeah.
But it's not like it's still living in a factory housing.
Right. I mean, but then it becomes an problem because some of these people are coming from villages where they're living in fucking mud huts.
Yeah. And so to them, that's great.
Yeah, so then it's not this binary thing of like it's all bad, but then the problem is the only reason they're living in mud huts is because of exploitative development that's taking advantage of their population in the first place. So this is like this big fucking chicken and egg problem of like, which one should we attack and which one should we address?
You can't really provide the same quality of education in rural China that you can provide in Beijing. You can't. It's just impossible. The logistics of delivering that, well, maybe now with computers, but for the longest time that wasn't a thing. And, my understanding of people who, so I think it was in like the 70s or the 80s, there was this big rush in China of people moving from rural farm China to cities, and they just took whatever jobs they could get because no matter what it was, they weren't sleeping on the dirt anymore,
Right.
and they had food, and they had a job, and they had enough money they could pay for their housing and send money home to their mom or dad.
This is the typical immigrant story.
It's the immigrant story in China, and it happened for a solid couple decades. But unlike the promise of finding your fortunes, wealth is consolidated within the hands of a few, and the working class remained a working class, and whatever upward mobility was promised was limited and isolated to people in the schools.
It was a lie.
It was all a lie.
Yeah, the same shit that's happening here is happening a lot.
And so we can improve the conditions for workers in places that are more affluent, but it still doesn't guarantee any improvement in conditions for workers in less affluent situations or conditions. And even with the best of intentions, we can make the factory housing better. But
it's still factory housing.
Still living in a factory.
Yeah.
And the town exists because the factory has to be nicer, otherwise people will kill themselves.
Yeah.
It's just like it might have colorful walls and it might not have gates, but it's basically for-profit prison.
Yeah. But this is kind of where again we're
looking at this through a Western lens, and to at least to me, it's just like, man, that sucks.
I mean, we're acknowledging feudalism, and that's kind of where, when you're in a feudal state, if you're the serf, like, you're fucking, they want you to fucking think you're getting a deal. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, you're getting a deal by tilling this land. You get to live on it. I mean, I get all the profit, but
you can have unlimited
you can have a house.
You can have all this food. You got food. You got a TV now.
Yeah, it's not the best.
Hey, here's a phone.
But you're not sleeping under the stars. You're not sleeping in the rain.
Yeah.
And then it becomes this trade-off of like, yeah, I guess I'm not. I don't really have any other options. So people get put in this fucking manufactured consent of arbitrary capital consolidation, and this is where the whole family, nepotistic resource allocation is like what we're stuck in and we're trying to get out of, but the laws aren't making it any easier because the people in Congress and shit are.
It doesn't even matter if the laws were better. There's still a human on the other end who either approves or denies the application, and if that person is just doesn't happen to like the way you look. Mm-hmm. And that could be the reason they decline your application, or they could say, "Oh, there was some mistake on it." Oh, I don't know. We got rid of it. It didn't pass, so we just threw it away. We don't keep that stuff.
Yep.
And there's nowhere on any of those applications to say what does the applicant look like,
right?
Because they're not allowed to do that kind of shit. Mm-hmm. But there's some scholarships and grants that rely on ethnicity.
Right. But then the whole thing is, you can tell that the part of the mortgage process is having to do an in-face assessment. So that's when it happens. It's like, you're not going to get past the banker and them not know you're minority at some point. Like, ooh, actually, that mortgage we discussed, we're going to have to renegotiate those terms. I know we had a phone call that had this one thing, but
you know what? All my life on applications, I put down other. And in the last several years, I started adding the Asian checkbox. Mm-hmm. And I swear, by checking off that Asian box, my credit score went up like 150 points. I'm serious.
I'm sure it did, yeah.
Like, it's like, oh, this guy's Asian? Yeah, just like that.
Yeah. No, man. And
then there are other times where it's like, I'm not going to check this box because I don't want to I don't want to help them fill out some demographic information. Mm-hmm. I want it to be neutral.
Yeah, no, I tried that for a while, and then it's like they can find out anyway.
Yeah, it's like no, I'm just American, okay?
Exactly. Yeah, I want to fill out that.
What, I don't look like a Pacific Islander. Asian people don't look like Pacific Islanders.
Yeah, like that's the whole thing of what you're saying in the sense of, I'm a fucking American citizen. Yeah. Why are you trying to figure out something else?
Yeah.
As if I'm like some, tribe that exists within this context. Like
the tribal census matters.
Right.